The morning rush had subsided, leaving behind the lingering scent of espresso and quiet conversations. Her elegant thin-framed glasses couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes, but they did nothing to diminish the quiet grace that seemed to follow her every movement. "The usual, Selina," called out Mitch, the elderly barista, who had witnessed countless mornings of her rushing between jobs. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he already reached for her regular order cup. "Just water today, Mitch." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, more so than any coffee could, another small sacrifice in an endless string of them. Her hand instinctively moved to adjust the strap of her bag, where a crumpled letter from the university's financial office lay hidden, its contents weighing more heavily than any textbook she'd ever carried. The notification of her possible academic hold due to outstanding tuition payments had arrived 3 days ago, but its impact still reverberated through every moment of her day. 30 years old, working 2 jobs, and still struggling to keep her dream of becoming a psychologist alive. The irony wasn't lost on her. Wanting to help others while barely managing to help herself, she found her usual corner spot, the one where the morning light filtered through the large windows, creating patterns on the worn wooden table. As she pulled out her psychology textbook, her fingers traced the familiar ritual of organizing her highlighters by color, a habit that surfaced whenever anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. Yellow for definitions, green for important concepts, pink for examples, small attempts at controlling what she could in a world that often felt beyond her grasp. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother, Nora. The message was simple. "Remember to eat something, sweetheart. Your dreams need fuel too." A small smile tugged at her lips, even as her heart clenched. Nora didn't know about the financial crisis looming over her head. Couldn't know. Her grandmother had sacrificed enough already, and at 78 she deserved peace, not more worries. The soft humming of conversation around her faded as she immersed herself in her studies, her finger tracing lines about cognitive behavioral therapy and trauma responses. The cruel paradox wasn't lost on her, learning about healing while feeling so broken inside. Her dream of opening a community center for at-risk youth seemed to slip further away with each passing day, like water through cupped hands. The bell above the door chimed, drawing her attention momentarily. A man walked in, his presence commanding yet somehow withdrawn. Tall, with a cleanly shaved head and a well-groomed beard, wearing a rolled-up sleeve button-down that revealed strong forearms. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, blue-gray and carrying a weight she recognized all too well, the weight of someone fighting battles in silence. Their gazes met for a brief moment, and something shifted in the air, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. But Selina quickly looked away, returning to her books. She couldn't afford distractions, not now. Not when everything she'd worked for hung by such a fragile thread. The man ordered his coffee, black, no sugar, his voice carrying a gentle authority that seemed at odds with his imposing frame. As he waited, his fingers drummed an absent pattern on the counter, betraying an inner restlessness that resonated with Selina's own. She forced herself to focus on her textbook, highlighting another passage about resilience in trauma recovery. The irony made her smile bitterly. Here she was, studying about helping others overcome their struggles, while her own walls were crumbling around her. Her phone buzzed again, this time a reminder about her shift at the diner in an hour. Reality crashed back in, and she began packing up her things, each movement measured and precise. As she stood, she noticed the man had chosen a seat by the window, his gaze fixed on the street outside, lost in thoughts she could only imagine. Something about his solitude called to her, but she pushed the thought away. Her life was complicated enough without adding mysterious strangers to the mix. Besides, she had bigger concerns, like figuring out how to come up with $3,000 before the university's deadline next month. As she walked past his table toward the exit, he looked up, their eyes meeting again. This time, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, interest, or perhaps just politeness. She nodded slightly, a habitual gesture of acknowledgement, and pushed through the door into the morning air. The weight of her dreams, her grandmother's hopes, and the mounting bills pressed down on her shoulders as she walked toward the diner. She straightened her spine, adjusting her glasses with one hand, a gesture that had become almost talismanic. One more shift, one more day, one more step toward a future that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that the man's eyes followed her departure, and that this brief encounter would soon become the catalyst for changes neither of them could have anticipated. Because sometimes, When life seems to be closing all the doors, it's preparing to open an unexpected window, even if that window comes in the form of an unusual proposition from a stranger with sad eyes and a kind smile. She hurried down the street, her practical shoes clicking against the pavement, unaware that fate had just dealt its first card in a game that would reshape her entire world. The morning sun caught the edges of her curls, creating a halo effect that made her look, just for a moment, like the warrior she truly was, battle-weary but undefeated, bearing the weight of dreams too precious to surrender. Pedro Alexander Monroe stood at his office window, watching the Boston skyline blur beneath the gentle patter of rain. His reflection stared back at him, broad shoulders wrapped in a charcoal button-down, his beard neatly trimmed, but his blue-grey eyes holding a storm of their own. Tomorrow would be his 38th birthday, and for the first time in his life, he was truly dreading it. His fingers absently rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break. The thought of spending another birthday alone in his perfectly designed but emotionally empty apartment made his chest tight. The divorce had been finalized for over a year now, but loneliness had a way of making time stretch like elastic, turning months into eternities. A notification pinged on his computer, another successful project completed, another client satisfied with his architectural designs, success that felt hollow without someone to share it with. He reached for his coffee cup, finding it empty for the third time that morning. His mind wandered back to the coffee shop from the day before, to the young woman with the elegant glasses and determined eyes. Something about her had struck him, perhaps the way she'd organized her highlighters with such precise care, or the quiet strength in her posture, despite the obvious weight she carried. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the window with increasing intensity. Pedro turned back to his desk, his gaze falling on the business card he'd picked up from the diner across from his office. He'd gone there for lunch, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. The waitress, her name tag had read Selena, had served him with professional courtesy, but he'd noticed the slight tremor in her hands when she counted her tips, the way her eyes had lingered on the total before tucking the money carefully into her apron pocket. An idea began to form in his mind. Crazy, perhaps inappropriate, but born from a desperate need to not face another birthday in crushing solitude. He picked up his phone, then set it down again, running a hand over his smooth head. The proposal he was considering was unconventional at best, potentially offensive at worst, but something about Selena's presence had made him feel more alive than he had in months. Across town, Selena was finishing her evening shift at the diner, her feet aching and her mind racing with calculations. The tips had been decent, but nowhere near what she needed. The letter from the university sat in her bag like a ticking time bomb. $3,000. The number mocked her with its impossibility. "Heading out, honey." Dolores, the senior waitress, called from behind the counter. "You look dead on your feet." Selena managed a smile, adjusting her glasses. "Just one more table to close out." She approached the corner booth, where a single customer sat nursing a cup of coffee. To her surprise, it was the man from the coffee shop, the one with the sad eyes and imposing presence. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Her voice remained professionally steady, despite the odd flutter in her stomach when he looked up at her. Pedro's fingers tensed around his coffee cup. "Actually," he cleared his throat, his discomfort evident in the way he rubbed the back of his neck. "I have an unusual proposal for you." Selena felt her body tense, years of experience having taught her to be wary of men's proposals. But something in his expression, vulnerability rather than predation, made her pause. "I'm listening," she said carefully, keeping her voice low enough that nearby tables couldn't hear. "Tomorrow's my birthday," Pedro began, his words coming out in a rush. "I don't want to spend it alone, but I don't want false sympathy from friends or set-up dates either. I'd like to hire you, just to spend a few hours having dinner and conversation. Nothing inappropriate, just company." The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility and danger. Selena studied him, her psychology training kicking in automatically. His body language spoke of genuine discomfort, but also sincerity. His eyes held no malice, only a profound loneliness that echoed her own. "How much?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, surprising them both. The weight of her student loans pressed against her conscience, making her consider things she never would have before. $1,000 for the evening. His voice was firm, businesslike, as if trying to make the unusual arrangement seem more normal. "Dinner at a public restaurant of your choosing, conversation, and then we go our separate ways." Selena's heart pounded. $1,000, a third of what she needed. Her mind raced with justifications and warnings. This wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd prayed for a solution to her financial problems, yet something about him made her want to trust, to believe that sometimes help came in unexpected packages. "I have conditions," she found herself saying, even as part of her mind screamed at the absurdity of the situation. "Public place only. I drive myself. No alcohol. And I reserve the right to leave at any point if I feel uncomfortable." Pedro's relief was visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "Agreed to all of it. I'll text you the details." He slid a business card across the table. Simple, elegant, with Pedro Alexander Monroe, architectural design printed in clean lines. Selena took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. "I finish my shift at 6 tomorrow." She wrote her number on his receipt, her usual neat handwriting betraying a slight shake. After he left, she stood at the counter, staring at his business card while mechanically folding napkins. The situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie, rather than her carefully planned life. She thought of her grandmother's favorite saying, "Sometimes blessings wear strange disguises." Later that night in her small apartment, Selena sat on the edge of her bed, Pedro's business card in one hand and her phone in the other. She'd already Googled him. His architectural firm was legitimate, his work well respected. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons this was a bad idea, but her heart remembered the genuine pain in his eyes, the careful way he'd made the proposal, the respect in his tone. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Restaurant details attached. Thank you for considering this, Pedro." She looked at the restaurant he'd suggested. Upscale but not flashy, public, well-reviewed. Everything about his approach spoke of someone trying to make an unusual situation feel safe and professional. Selena closed her eyes, thinking of her grandmother's medical bills hidden in the kitchen drawer, of the university deadline looming, of dreams teetering on the edge of collapse. Then she thought of the man with sad eyes, who just wanted someone to talk to on his birthday. Her fingers moved across the phone screen. "I'll be there. Happy early birthday." As she set her alarm for the next day, Selena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just set something significant in motion. Whether it was salvation or complication remained to be seen, but for the first time in weeks, she felt something that resembled hope. Strange and uncomfortable as its packaging might be, Selena stood before her mirror, scrutinizing her reflection with unusual intensity. She'd chosen a knee-length navy dress that managed to be both professional and flattering, her dark curls partially down but neatly styled. Her thin-framed glasses caught the light as she adjusted them, a nervous habit she couldn't shake. The clock on her bedside table read 7:15 p.m., 45 minutes before she was due to meet Pedro at the restaurant. "It's just dinner," she whispered to herself, but the $1,000 they'd agreed upon made it anything but simple. Her psychology textbooks lay scattered on her bed, abandoned mid-study when anxiety about the evening had overtaken her ability to concentrate. Her phone buzzed, a text from her grandmother. "Hope you're eating well tonight, sweetheart. Don't study too hard." The innocent message made her stomach clench with guilt. What would Nora think if she knew her granddaughter had agreed to be someone's paid dinner companion? The drive to Cypress Garden, the upscale restaurant Pedro had chosen, gave Selena time to rehearse her boundaries again. Public place? Check. Her own transportation? Check. No alcohol? Absolutely. She'd Googled the restaurant thoroughly. It was elegant but not intimidating, known for its garden atrium seating and excellent service. She arrived 10 minutes early, her practical black heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the host stand. Before she could speak, a familiar voice called her name. "Selena." Pedro stood from a bench near the entrance, and her breath caught slightly. He wore a deep blue blazer over a light grey shirt, his beard trimmed precisely, but it was the genuine warmth in his eyes that struck her most. He looked simultaneously powerful and vulnerable, a contradiction that intrigued her professional mind, even as it tugged at something deeper. "Happy birthday," she offered, proud of how steady her voice remained. Up close, she noticed the slight nervousness in his posture, the way his fingers briefly touched the back of his neck before extending his hand to her. "Thank you for coming," he replied, his voice carrying that same gentle authority she remembered from the diner. As they were led to their table, a corner spot in the garden atrium with clear sightlines to all exits, she noted appreciatively, Pedro maintained a respectful distance. The atrium's glass ceiling revealed a sky turning to dusk, strings of warm lights creating a gentle ambience among the indoor trees and flowers. Their table, set with elegant simplicity, offered both intimacy and the safety of public visibility. "I took the liberty of requesting still water," Pedro said as they settled into their seats, "but please order whatever you'd like." Selina appreciated the subtle acknowledgement of their no-alcohol agreement. "Thank you. The place is beautiful." She glanced around, genuine appreciation in her voice. The garden setting reminded her of the small collection of plants she maintained on her apartment windowsill, living things that needed care but gave beauty in return. "I thought you might like it," Pedro replied, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, I noticed you looking at the plants in the coffee shop window." The observation surprised her, both that he'd noticed and that he'd remembered. Their waiter appeared with water and menus, providing a moment to gather her thoughts. "So," Selina began after they'd ordered, her fingers unconsciously arranging her silverware to perfect parallel lines, "how does one typically spend a birthday dinner with a stranger?" A smile touched Pedro's lips, softening his features. "Honestly, I have no idea. This is definitely a first for me." His honesty was disarming. "Maybe we could just talk? Real conversation, without the usual social pretenses." "Real conversation," Selina echoed, considering. "That's a rare commodity these days." "Too rare," Pedro agreed. He seemed to wrestle with something internally before continuing. "Look, I know this situation is unusual, but I want you to know, I respect the boundaries you set. I'm not looking for anything beyond conversation and company." Selina studied him, her training kicking in automatically. His body language matched his words. Open palms, steady eye contact, shoulders relaxed. "Why me?" she found herself asking. "Why not just hire a professional companion service?" Pedro's fingers traced the rim of his water glass. "Because when I saw you in the coffee shop and then at the diner, you seemed real. There was no pretense, no performance. Just someone carrying their own weights but still standing tall." He paused, color touching his cheeks. "That probably sounds ridiculous." "No," Selina said softly, surprised by the accuracy of his observation. "It doesn't." Their appetizers arrived. She'd chosen a simple soup. He'd opted for a salad. As they began to eat, the initial awkwardness began to dissolve into something more natural. "What made you choose architecture?" Selina asked, genuinely curious about the man behind the unusual proposition. Pedro's eyes lit up slightly. "I've always been fascinated by the way spaces affect people, how the right design can make someone feel safe, inspired, at peace." He gestured to the atrium around them. "Like this place, the balance of nature and structure, of public and private space. It's not just about building walls. It's about creating environments that nurture the human spirit." His passion was evident, and Selina found herself leaning forward slightly. "That's not unlike psychology in some ways. We're both interested in how environments, physical or emotional, shape human experience." "Is that what drew you to psychology?" Pedro asked, his attention focused entirely on her. Selina hesitated, weighing how much to share, but something about the evening, about his obvious sincerity, made her want to offer truth for truth. "I want to help kids who think they're running out of options, to show them that their past doesn't have to define their future." She adjusted her glasses. "That probably sounds idealistic." "It sounds brave," Pedro countered softly. "To carry others' hopes along with your own, that takes real strength." Their main courses arrived, but the conversation continued to flow naturally. Pedro spoke about his divorce without bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement of lessons learned. Selina shared stories about her grandmother's wisdom, carefully avoiding mention of their financial struggles. As they talked, Selina began to notice the small things, the way Pedro's whole face transformed when he smiled genuinely, how he listened with complete attention when she spoke, the gentle humor that occasionally broke through his reserved exterior. She found herself relaxing, the thought of payment receding as genuine connection took precedence. "Tell me something you've never told anyone else," Pedro suggested as they finished their meals, the evening sky now dark above the atrium glass. Selina considered, then offered, "Sometimes I sing to my plants when I water them, old lullabies my grandmother taught me." The admission made her blush slightly. "Your turn." Pedro's expression softened. "I design elaborate tree houses in my spare time, ones I'll probably never build. They're like escape routes for the soul." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability of the admission, touched something in Selina's heart. Here was a man who could have used his wealth to buy shallow company, yet he sought genuine connection, even if he had to pay for the opportunity. As the evening drew to a close, Pedro reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Thank you," he said simply, placing it beside her plate. "This has been more than I hoped for." Selina looked at the envelope, feeling an unexpected complexity of emotions. The money would help save her dreams, but the evening had given her something else. A reminder that connection could come in unexpected forms, that sometimes the most genuine moments arose from the strangest circumstances. "Thank you for making it easy to be real," she replied softly, gathering her purse. As they walked to the entrance, Pedro maintained that same respectful distance, but something had shifted in the air between them. "Drive safely," he said as they reached the parking lot. Then, with a hint of uncertainty, "Maybe I'll see you at the coffee shop sometime." Selina smiled, surprising herself with her response. "I'd like that." As she drove home, the envelope secure in her purse, Selina found herself humming one of her grandmother's lullabies. The evening had been many things: unusual, enlightening, somehow both professional and intimately personal. But most surprisingly, it had been real. In her rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of Pedro standing under the restaurant's lights watching her car depart. The image stayed with her, a man who had turned loneliness into an opportunity for genuine connection, who had seen past her careful facades to recognize a kindred spirit. The $1,000 would help save her education, but something told her that wasn't the most valuable thing she'd gained that evening. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Selena realized she was still smiling, and for once she didn't feel the need to analyze why. The morning after Pedro's birthday dinner, Selena sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the envelope she hadn't opened the night before. Sunlight streamed through her window, catching the leaves of her beloved plants and casting dappled shadows across the worn wooden surface. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Money can buy a bed, sweetheart, but it can't buy the peace to sleep in it." With trembling fingers, she finally opened the envelope. Inside, she found not just the promised $1,000, but a handwritten note on cream-colored cardstock. "Thank you for making my birthday meaningful. Your company was worth far more than any monetary value we agreed upon. Pedro." Beneath his signature was a business card with his personal number written on the back. The gesture made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Her phone buzzed, a reminder about her morning class. Reality crashed back in as she quickly tucked the money into her bag, already calculating how to make the payment to the university without raising questions. But as she gathered her books, her mind kept drifting back to the previous evening, to profound conversations under garden lights, to the way Pedro's eyes had softened when he talked about his architectural dreams. Across town, Pedro stood in his home office, coffee growing cold on his desk as he stared out at the Boston skyline. For the first time in months, his apartment didn't feel quite so empty. He found himself remembering small details. The way Selena's eyes lit up when she spoke about psychology, how her fingers had unconsciously arranged the silverware in perfect alignment, the genuine laugh she'd tried to hide when he'd told her about his secret treehouse designs. His phone chimed with birthday messages from colleagues and distant relatives, each one feeling hollow compared to the genuine connection he'd experienced the night before. He picked up his phone several times, composing and deleting messages to Selena, unsure of the protocol following their unusual arrangement. The day progressed, pulling them both into their separate worlds. Selena attended her morning classes, her notes unusually scattered as her mind wandered to gardens and conversations. During her lunch break, she walked to the university's financial office, the envelope's contents burning a hole in her bag. "Partial payment on my outstanding balance," she told the clerk, sliding $800 across the counter. She'd kept $200 for her grandmother's medications, a decision that had kept her awake half the night. "Still leaves you short," the clerk reminded her, not unkindly. "Deadline's coming up fast." Selena nodded, adjusting her glasses. "I know. I'm working on it." As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the office window. She looked different somehow, as if the previous night had left some invisible mark on her. Meanwhile, Pedro sat through client meetings, his usual sharp focus slightly dulled by thoughts of dark curls and intelligent eyes. During a lunch break, he found himself sketching a small garden sanctuary in his notebook, a space designed around the way Selena had looked among the atrium's plants, peaceful and quietly strong. "You seem different today," his assistant Madeleine observed as she dropped off some files. "The birthday wasn't so bad after all?" Pedro allowed himself a small smile. "It was unexpected." The afternoon found Selena at her grandmother's small house, the familiar scent of lavender and fresh laundry wrapping around her like a comfort blanket. Nora sat in her favorite armchair, her skilled fingers working on a piece of embroidery despite the slight tremor in her hands. "You're glowing today," Nora observed, her wise eyes taking in her granddaughter's distracted expression. "Something you want to tell me?" Selina busied herself watering her grandmother's extensive collection of houseplants. "Just had a good study session last night," she lied, guilt coating her tongue. She'd never lied to Nora before, and the weight of it sat heavy in her chest. Nora hummed, clearly unconvinced. "And does this study session have a name?" Selina nearly dropped the watering can, water splashing onto the hardwood floor. As she grabbed a towel to clean up the spill, she caught sight of her phone screen lighting up with a notification. A text from an unknown number. "The coffee shop has a new tea blend you might enjoy. They say it pairs well with their lemon scones. Pedro." Her heart did an unexpected flip, even as her mind raced with complications. This wasn't supposed to happen. The evening was meant to be a one-time arrangement, a simple transaction. So why did his message make her smile? Why had she memorized the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed? "Selina Marie Brooks," Nora's voice cut through her thoughts. "I've never seen you smile at a textbook notification like that." "It's nothing, Grandma," Selina insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. She busied herself straightening the already neat stack of magazines on the coffee table. "Nothing doesn't make my granddaughter's eyes dance like that," Nora observed softly, "but you'll tell me when you're ready." Later that evening, in her apartment, Selina sat among her textbooks, trying to focus on an essay about cognitive behavioral therapy, but her thoughts kept drifting to the way Pedro had listened to her, really listened, as if her words mattered. Her fingers hovered over her phone, his message still unanswered. Finally, after rearranging her highlighters 3 times, she typed, "Tea and scones sound nice, but I can't accept more arrangements." His response came quickly. Not an arrangement, just a recommendation between fellow plant enthusiasts. Selina stared at the message, feeling the careful walls she'd built around her heart shift slightly. It was dangerous, this potential for real connection. She had too much at stake, too many responsibilities, too many secrets. But as she got ready for bed, her eyes fell on the business card he'd given her, now tucked into the frame of her mirror. The memory of his voice describing imaginary tree houses, of genuine conversation under garden lights, made her question whether some risks were worth taking. Her phone buzzed one final time. "Sweet dreams, Selina. Thank you for making my birthday one I'll actually want to remember." She fell asleep with the ghost of a smile on her lips, dreaming of garden atriums and honest eyes, of connections that defied simple categorization. In her sleep, she didn't notice how her usually rigid posture had softened, how her hands had unclenched from their anxious fists. Across the city, Pedro sat in his home office, working late, but feeling more energized than he had in months. On his desk, a new sketch was taking shape, a community center design with a rooftop garden, inspired by a dream someone had shared over dinner. He didn't let himself analyze why he was drawing it, or why the thought of a certain psychology student's smile made his world feel less empty. Sometimes, they both realized in their separate spaces, the most meaningful connections come disguised as simple transactions, and the heart recognizes truth even when the mind tries to deny it. The question was, what would they do with that recognition? The morning rush at the coffee shop had dwindled to a gentle hum when Selina pushed through the door, the familiar bell chiming above her head. She told herself she'd chosen this time for studying because it was quieter, not because she knew Pedro usually came in around now. Her psychology textbook felt heavier than usual in her bag, weighted down by anticipation she refused to acknowledge. "How your usual today?" Mitch asked, already reaching for her cup. His knowing smile suggested he'd noticed her new pattern of lingering during late morning hours. "Yes, please." She could afford coffee again, at least for now. The partial payment to the university had bought her some time, but the remaining balance loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. She settled into her usual corner spot, arranging her study materials with methodical precision. The morning sun painted warm rectangles on her table, and she found herself remembering similar light patterns in the restaurant's atrium 3 nights ago. The bell chimed again. Selina kept her eyes fixed on her textbook, but she knew it was him. Something in the atmosphere shifted, like the air before a summer storm. She could feel his presence even before he spoke. "Is this seat taken?" Pedro's voice carried its usual gentle authority, but with an undercurrent of uncertainty that made her heart flutter. Selina looked up, meeting those blue-gray eyes that had haunted her thoughts. He held 2 plates. "I noticed you haven't tried their lemon scones yet," he he said, placing one in front of her. "I can't accept," she began, but he cut her off gently. "Consider it market research. I need an objective opinion on whether they pair well with their new tea blend." His smile was warm but careful, respecting the delicate balance between them. Selina found herself smiling back, adjusting her glasses. "That's a very scientific approach to breakfast. I've always believed in thorough research." He settled into the chair across from her, maintaining a professional distance despite the intimacy of their shared memory. The scone was indeed delicious, buttery, and bright with lemon. They fell into easy conversation, discussing everything and nothing, the way morning light affected architectural design, her latest psychology readings on human connection, their shared appreciation for the coffee shop's quiet atmosphere. "How's the community center project coming along?" Pedro asked, referring to her dream of helping at-risk youth. The question was casual, but his eyes held genuine interest. Selina's fingers tightened around her cup. "It's complicated." She thought of the remaining balance she owed, of dreams teetering on the edge of reality. Sometimes the distance between vision and execution feels infinite. "I know something about that," Pedro said softly. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "May I show you something?" She nodded, and he pulled up a series of architectural sketches, a building design that made her breath catch. It featured open spaces flooded with natural light, a rooftop garden, and areas that somehow managed to feel both safe and inspiring. "This is beautiful," she whispered, leaning closer to see the details. "The way you've created these private consultation spaces while maintaining an open flow." "It's just a concept," Pedro said quickly, but his eyes betrayed his investment in the design. "Something I've been working on since our dinner." The implication hung in the air between them. He'd designed this for her dream, inspired by their conversation. The realization made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. "Pedro," she began, her voice uncertain. "I can't. It's just a sketch," he interrupted gently. "No strings, no expectations. Sometimes dreams need a visual framework to feel more real." Their fingers brushed as he took his phone back, and the contact sent electricity through them both. For a moment neither spoke, the coffee shop's ambient noise fading into background static. "I should get to class," Selina said finally, gathering her books with slightly trembling hands. The walls she'd built around her heart felt dangerously thin. "Of course." Pedro stood, maintaining that careful distance. "Though I was wondering," she paused, heart drumming an uneven rhythm. "There's an architectural exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts this weekend. They're showcasing community-focused design projects." He rubbed the back of his neck, that endearing nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. "Would you be interested in seeing it? Strictly as a research opportunity, of course." Selina looked at him, really looked at him, at the way he held himself with both strength and vulnerability, at the genuine hope in his eyes, at the respect with which he offered this new possibility. "Not as an arrangement?" she asked carefully. "No money, no obligations," he confirmed. "Just two people with shared interests exploring some architectural innovations." She should say no. She had studying to do, bills to worry about, lines she shouldn't cross. But something in her heart had shifted since that dinner, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. "Saturday afternoon," she found herself saying. His smile transformed his entire face. "I'll text you the details." As she walked to her class, Selina's mind raced with justifications and warnings, but underneath the practical concerns, a warmth had taken root, a feeling of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. In her apartment that evening, she found herself looking up the exhibition online. The featured projects included several community centers, each designed to serve underprivileged neighborhoods. Her cursor hovered over an image that looked remarkably similar to Pedro's sketch. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "Thank you for the company today. Your insight on spatial psychology was enlightening." Before she could respond, another message from her grandmother appeared. "Remember, sweetheart, some walls are meant to protect us, but others just keep the light out." Selina stared at both messages, feeling the ground shifting beneath her carefully constructed world. She thought of the way Pedro looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with understanding and genuine interest. The way he respected her boundaries while gently suggesting windows through them. Standing at her window, watching the city lights blur in the evening rain, Selina allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been fighting, somewhere between a paid dinner and a shared scone, between professional distance and genuine connection. Her heart had started to hope again. Her plants needed watering, and as she tended to them, she found herself humming one of her grandmother's lullabies. For the first time in years, the melody carried no undertone of worry or exhaustion, just a quiet joy she wasn't quite ready to name. Across the city, Pedro sat in his home office adding details to the community center design. He told himself it was just a creative exercise, but his heart knew better. Every line he drew was inspired by a dream shared over dinner, every space designed to nurture the kind of hope he'd seen in Selina's eyes when she spoke about helping others. Saturday felt both too far away and frighteningly close. They were crossing lines, blurring boundaries, stepping into territory neither had mapped. But perhaps they both thought in their separate spaces some journeys were worth the risk of getting lost. Saturday arrived with unexpected warmth for a Boston spring day. Selina stood before the Museum of Fine Art's imposing entrance, her simple emerald dress catching the breeze. She'd spent more time than she cared to admit choosing an outfit that struck the right balance, professional enough for a museum, but with a touch of something more that she wasn't ready to analyze. "You look lovely," Pedro's voice came from behind her, carrying that gentle warmth she'd grown to anticipate. When she turned, her breath caught slightly. He wore dark jeans and a light grey button-down, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms, but it was the way he looked at her, like she was an unexpected masterpiece among the museum's collections, that made her heart flutter. "The architecture's lovely," she deflected, gesturing to the building's classical facade. "Professional, safe." Pedro smiled, seeing through her deflection but accepting it gracefully. "Wait until you see the modern wing. The interplay of light and shadow there is remarkable." As they walked into the museum, Selina noticed how naturally they fell into step together, how Pedro unconsciously adjusted his stride to match hers. No money had changed hands for this meeting, yet she felt more nervous than she had at their arranged dinner. The exhibition on community architecture was housed in a spacious gallery, sunlight streaming through strategic skylights. They moved through the space slowly, Pedro offering insights about design elements, while Selina shared perspectives on how different spaces might affect psychological well-being. "Look at how they've designed this youth center," Pedro pointed out, gesturing to a detailed model. "The circular gathering spaces encourage connection, while still providing clear sightlines to all exits. Safety and community in one design." Selina stepped closer, her arm brushing against his as she leaned in to study the model. Neither moved away from the contact. "It reminds me of your sketch," she said softly, "the one you showed me at the coffee shop." "That was inspired by our conversation," Pedro admitted, his hand moving to the back of his neck in that now familiar nervous gesture. "By your vision." Before she could respond, a voice called out across the gallery, "Pedro, Pedro Monroe." They turned to see an elegant woman in her 50s approaching, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. Selina felt Pedro tense beside her. "Diane," he acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," the woman, Diane, replied, her sharp eyes taking in Selina's presence with obvious interest. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" Pedro's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Diane Bradford, this is Selina Brooks. Selina, Diane was my mother-in-law, former mother-in-law." The words hung in the air like smoke, changing the atmosphere. Selina felt the weight of Diane's assessment, saw the calculations behind her polite smile. "How lovely to meet you," Diane said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "I didn't realize Pedro had started dating again. It's been, 15 months since the divorce?" "Selina and I are colleagues," Pedro said firmly, though something in his voice wavered on the word colleagues. "We share an interest in community-focused architecture." Diane's perfectly arched eyebrow suggested she didn't believe him for a moment. "Of course. Well, don't let me interrupt your professional discussion." She turned to leave, then added with artificial sweetness, "Do be careful, dear. Pedro has a habit of building beautiful things and then walking away when they need maintenance." The barb landed with precision, and Selina felt Pedro flinch slightly beside her. As Diane clicked away, the easy comfort of their afternoon had shattered like fine crystal. "I'm sorry," Pedro said quietly, his eyes fixed on a distant point. "Diane has always been protective of her daughter's narrative." Selina studied his profile, seeing the tension in his jaw, the hurt he tried to hide. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm gently. "Hey, show me more about that rooftop garden design." The gratitude in his eyes made her heart ache. They moved through the rest of the exhibition, their conversation gradually returning to its natural rhythm, but something had shifted. The lines they'd carefully drawn between professional and personal had begun to blur. Later, as they sat in the museum's cafe sharing a slice of chocolate cake, Selina found herself wanting to know more. "Tell me about the divorce," she asked softly. "Not the society version, the real one." Pedro was quiet for a long moment, his fork tracing patterns in the chocolate sauce. "I thought I could build the perfect life like I build my projects, with precise plans and careful execution. But people aren't buildings. You can't just design happiness into existence. What happened? We looked perfect on paper. Successful architect, corporate lawyer, the right social circles." He smiled bitterly. "But underneath, we were both trying to live up to expectations instead of being real. When I suggested we try for children, she admitted she'd been taking birth control in secret for years. Not because she didn't want kids, but because she didn't want them with me." Selina's hand found his across the table before she could stop herself. His fingers intertwined with hers naturally, as if they'd done this 100 times before. "That's why the birthday dinner meant so much," he continued quietly. "You were just real. No pretense, no social game. Just honest conversation and genuine presence." "Pedro," Selina began, her heart racing, "I should tell you something." But her phone buzzed urgently, displaying her grandmother's number. Nora never called during the day unless it was important. Fear gripped her chest. "I'm sorry I have to take this," she said, already standing. "Of course," Pedro responded immediately, concern evident in his voice. In the quiet hallway near the cafe, Selina answered the call. Her grandmother's voice was shaky. "Sweetheart, I hate to worry you, but I've fallen. Nothing broken, but I can't quite get up." "I'm coming right now," Selina said firmly, her mind already calculating the fastest route. When she returned to the table, Pedro took one look at her face and stood. "What do you need?" The simple question, offered without hesitation, made her want to cry. "My grandmother. She's fallen. She says she's okay, but—" "I'll drive you," he said, already gathering their things. "You don't have to—" "Selina," his voice was gentle but firm, "let me help." In his car, a practical but luxury model that somehow suited him perfectly, Selina directed him to her grandmother's small house in Dorchester. Her hands twisted anxiously in her lap, until Pedro reached over at a stoplight and squeezed her fingers briefly. "She'll be okay," he said softly. When they arrived, Selina ran ahead while Pedro parked. She found Nora on the kitchen floor, looking embarrassed but otherwise unharmed. "I was trying to reach the good teacups," she explained as Selina helped her up. "We so rarely have visitors." Footsteps in the hallway made them both look up. Pedro stood in the doorway, his imposing frame somehow making the small kitchen feel safer rather than crowded. "Grandma, this is Pedro," Selina said, suddenly aware of how this must look. "He's the reason my granddaughter's been glowing lately," Nora finished, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Come in, dear, since I've made such a spectacle of myself. The least we can do is offer you some tea." "Actually," Pedro said, stepping forward with gentle authority, "I noticed your back steps are uneven. Would you mind if I took a look? I'm an architect, and those kinds of hazards worry me." For the next hour, Pedro examined the house's various structural issues, while Nora told embarrassing stories about Selina's childhood, much to Selina's mortification. But watching Pedro interact with her grandmother, listening to her stories with genuine interest, explaining potential home improvements in terms she could understand, treating her with such natural respect, made something in Selina's heart shift irreversibly. As the afternoon light began to fade, Pedro insisted on installing a grip bar in the bathroom before leaving. Selina watched him work, efficient and careful, and thought about how he'd dropped everything to help without hesitation. "He's a good one," Nora said quietly beside her, while Pedro was measuring the wall. "The real kind of good, not the polished kind." Selina watched Pedro double-check the bar's stability, thinking of paid dinners and genuine connections, of walls built and bridges formed. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me. Because somewhere between an arranged dinner and an impromptu home repair, between professional distance and genuine care, she'd started to fall for him. And that wasn't part of any plan she'd ever made." The university's financial office felt colder than usual as Selina stared at the numbers on the screen. Even with her recent payment, the remaining balance seemed insurmountable. 2 weeks until the final deadline, and she was still thousands short. The memory of Pedro installing the grip bar in her grandmother's bathroom yesterday made her chest tight with conflicting emotions. "Miss Brooks," the financial advisor, Mrs. Reynolds peered at her over wire-rimmed glasses. Have you considered taking a leave of absence? You could return when your financial situation is more stable. The suggestion felt like a physical blow. Leave? When she was so close to finishing. That's not an option, Selina said firmly, adjusting her own glasses. There must be another way. Well, Mrs. Reynolds hesitated, there is a last-minute scholarship opportunity. The Newman Foundation is looking for candidates interested in community service and youth development. The deadline is tomorrow. Selina's heart leaped. This was exactly what she needed, a legitimate way to fund her education that aligned with her goals. As she left the office, clutching the scholarship information, her phone buzzed with a text from Pedro. How's your grandmother today? I know a reliable contractor who can fix those loose floorboards we noticed. His genuine concern made her smile, even as it complicated her emotions. She'd spent half the night thinking about how naturally he'd fit into her small world, how Nora had lit up talking to him, how right it had felt to have him there in a crisis. But the scholarship application in her bag reminded her of reality. She needed to focus on securing her future, not getting lost in feelings that could jeopardize everything. Grandma's fine, she texted back. Thank you again for yesterday. His response came quickly. I have some community center designs I'd like your opinion on. Coffee tomorrow? Selina stared at the message, her heart and mind at war. Can't tomorrow. Scholarship application deadline. Need any help? I've written my share of proposals. The offer was tempting, but she needed to maintain boundaries. This thing between them, whatever it was becoming, was already dangerous enough. I've got it covered, she replied, then added, but thank you. That evening, sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by scholarship materials, Selina tried to focus on the application, but her mind kept drifting to the way Pedro had looked in her grandmother's small kitchen, his imposing frame somehow making the space feel safer rather than crowded. Her phone buzzed again. Nora this time. That young man of yours called to check on me. Insisted on sending over a handyman to fix the steps tomorrow. I didn't raise you to be afraid of good things, sweetheart. Selina's fingers tightened around the phone. She hadn't told Pedro about her financial struggles, about the real reason she'd agreed to that birthday dinner. The thought of him discovering the truth made her stomach churn. A knock at her apartment door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Pedro holding what looked like takeout bags. Her heart raced as she opened the door. What are you doing here? You mentioned you had a deadline, he said, holding up the bags. I thought you might forget to eat. The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly him, that her eyes burned with unexpected tears. You didn't have to. I wanted to. His eyes held hers, full of warmth and something deeper that made her breath catch. May I come in? She should say no, should maintain professional distance, should protect her heart and her secrets. Instead, she found herself stepping aside to let him enter. Her small apartment seemed to shrink in his presence, but not uncomfortably so. His eyes took in the plants on every windowsill, the perfectly organized desk, the psychology books stacked by color on her shelves. I brought options, he said, setting the bags on her small kitchen counter. Italian or Thai. And before you protest, consider this repayment for your excellent museum tour commentary yesterday. The normalcy of his tone, the careful way he gave her an excuse to accept his kindness, made something in her chest ache. As they settled on her small couch with containers of pad thai, the scholarship materials conspicuously visible on her bed, Pedro's eyes flickered to them. Tell me about the scholarship, he said softly. Selina twirled noodles around her fork, buying time. It's for students focused on community development. The Newman Foundation is looking for candidates who want to make a difference in underprivileged communities. That's perfect for you, he said, his voice warm with conviction. Then, more carefully, Selina, about yesterday with Diane. We don't have to talk about it, she interrupted quickly. I think we do. He set his food down, turning to face her fully. What she said about me walking away when things need maintenance, I need you to know that's not who I am anymore. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. Pedro, I know we started this, whatever this is, in an unusual way, but what's growing between us feels real to me. Important. Selina stood abruptly, moving to the window where her plants offered familiar comfort. I haven't been entirely honest with you. She felt, rather than heard him move to stand behind her, keeping a careful distance. About what? That night. Your birthday. Her voice trembled slightly. I agreed because I needed the money. My tuition was due and I was desperate and... I know, he said quietly. She turned to face him, shocked. "What?" "I saw how you counted your tips at the diner, how you hesitated over the coffee shop menu prices. I knew you needed help, but also that you'd never accept charity." His eyes held no judgment, only understanding. "That's why I made it a transaction, to give you a way to accept help without compromising your dignity." The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. "I never meant to— To what? To be genuine? To show me real kindness and understanding? To make me feel truly seen for the first time in years?" He stepped closer, his presence both overwhelming and exactly what she needed. "The money was just an excuse, Selina. What happened between us, what's still happening, that's real." She looked up at him through tears, seeing the truth in his eyes. "I'm still struggling," she admitted. "The scholarship. I need it. My grandmother's medical bills, the tuition. Then let's work on your application," he said simply. "Together. Not as an architect helping a student, or as a man trying to impress a woman, but as two people who care about each other's dreams." Something in her chest unlocked at his words. They spent the next few hours refining her application, Pedro's experience with proposals proving invaluable. But it was more than that. His presence, his unwavering support, the way he believed in her vision without trying to take control of it. As the night grew late and the application took final shape, Selina felt the weight of secrets lifting from her shoulders. Pedro gathered the empty food containers, moving through her small kitchen as if he belonged there. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for tonight, but for understanding." He turned to her, his eyes serious. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth, even the parts you thought might push me away." As he left, promising to check on Nora again tomorrow, Selina leaned against her closed door. The scholarship application was ready, her grandmother was being cared for, and her heart was full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Because sometimes, she was learning, the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or arranged in careful transactions. Sometimes they came in the form of pad thai and proposal editing, in gentle understanding and unwavering support, in the courage to be real with someone who saw you clearly and stayed anyway. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospital corridor as Selina rushed toward the emergency room, her heart pounding against her ribs. The call from her neighbor had been brief but terrifying. Nora had collapsed while getting the mail. Now every step echoed with fear and regret. Why hadn't she checked on her grandmother this morning? Why had she been so focused on the scholarship interview? She rounded the corner and stopped abruptly. Pedro was already there, his broad shoulders somehow making the sterile waiting room feel less threatening. He stood as soon as he saw her, crossing the space in long strides. "She's stable," he said before she could speak, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Doctor says it was a minor stroke, but they caught it early." Selina's knees weakened with relief, and Pedro guided her to a chair. "How did you—" "Mrs. Martinez called me after she called you. She had my number from when I sent the handyman." He sat beside her, close enough to support but not crowd. "I got here about 20 minutes ago." The fact that her elderly neighbor had thought to call Pedro, had seen him as someone to rely on in a crisis, made Selina's heart twist with emotion. "The scholarship interview, already handled," he interrupted gently. "I called the foundation, explained the emergency. They're rescheduling for next week." Tears threatened, and Selina closed her eyes. "I can't keep doing this alone," she whispered, the admission costing her more than money ever could. Pedro's hand found hers, warm and steady. "You don't have to." A doctor approached then, clipboard in hand. "Family of Nora Brooks?" The next hour passed in a blur of medical terms and decisions. The doctor recommended moving Nora to a rehabilitation facility for a few weeks, something insurance would only partially cover. Selina felt the familiar weight of financial pressure settling on her shoulders. "We'll figure it out," Pedro said quietly, as they stood by Nora's bedside later, watching her sleep. Together, Selina looked up at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd dropped everything to be here, who'd handled practical details while she processed emotional ones, who kept saying we instead of you. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. No grand gestures, no elaborate speeches, just truth, offered in a hospital room while life shifted beneath their feet. "Pedro," her voice trembled. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I just want you to know that you're not alone, not in any of this." A nurse entered to check Nora's vitals and they stepped into the hallway. Selina's mind raced with calculations. rehabilitation costs, missed work hours, the remaining tuition balance. Even with the scholarship, if she got it. "Stop," Pedro said gently. "I can see you trying to solve everything at once. Let's take it one step at a time." She laughed shakily. "That obvious, huh? You organize your highlighters by color and your books by theme. You like order and control because life hasn't given you much of either." His voice held no judgment, only understanding. "But sometimes strength means letting others help carry the weight." A memory surfaced. Pedro installing the grip bar in Nora's bathroom, his careful attention to every detail. He'd been trying to prevent exactly this kind of crisis, while Selena had been too caught up in maintaining independence to see the bigger picture. "I'm not good at letting people in," she admitted. "The last time I really depended on someone—" "Was your father?" Pedro guessed softly. Selena nodded. They'd never discussed her father before, but somehow Pedro had sensed the old wound there. "He left when I was 12. No warning, no goodbye, just empty closets and my mother's broken heart. After that, depending on people felt too much like setting myself up for abandonment." Pedro's hand found the small of her back, grounding her. "I'm not him, Selena. I know." And she did know, somewhere beneath the layers of fear and protection she'd built around her heart. "That's what scares me most." Before Pedro could respond, Selena's phone buzzed, the university's financial office. Her stomach dropped as she read the message. Due to a system error, scholarship notifications would be delayed another week. The tuition deadline, however, remained unchanged. Pedro read the shift in her expression. "Bad news." She showed him the message, her hand shaking slightly. "I can't. With Nora's rehabilitation costs now." "Let me help," he said quietly. "Not as a transaction this time, as someone who believes in you and your dreams." "I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He turned her gently to face him. "You once paid me with your time and company because I was afraid of being alone on my birthday. Let me pay you back by investing in your future." Selena stared at their joined hands, thinking of all the ways they'd moved from transaction to connection. "It's too much. It's not enough," he countered. "Not compared to what you've given me. You showed me that real connection isn't about perfect surfaces or social expectations. It's about being genuine even when it's messy. It's about installing grip bars and eating pad thai and showing up when life gets hard." A nurse passed by, offering a sympathetic smile. In the room behind them, monitors beeped steadily, marking Nora's stable condition. Life continued its relentless forward motion while they stood in the hallway, making choices that would reshape their futures. "If I accept," Selena said slowly, "it has to be a loan, with terms and paperwork. Deal." Pedro's relief was palpable. "Though I should warn you, my interest rates are unusual. They're calculated in coffee shop conversations and honest moments." Despite everything, Selena felt her lips curve into a smile. "That's terrible financial planning. I learned from the best. Some woman once taught me that the most valuable transactions aren't about money at all." In her hospital bed, Nora stirred slightly, drawing their attention. As they returned to her side, Selena felt something shift in her chest like walls crumbling, but instead of feeling exposed, she felt protected. Because sometimes strength isn't about standing alone, but about choosing who to stand beside. "I love you too, you know," she whispered so quietly she wasn't sure he'd hear. But Pedro's hand tightened on hers, and in the quiet hospital room, surrounded by beeping monitors and the smell of antiseptic, they began to build something new, a foundation based not on transactions or arrangements, but on trust, understanding, and the courage to be real with each other. As morning light painted patterns on the hospital floor, Selena thought about how life's biggest changes often come disguised as ordinary moments. A paid dinner that became real conversation, a chance meeting that became essential connection, a moment of crisis that became a promise of forever. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let love in, even when, especially when, it arrives in unexpected packages. The rehabilitation center's garden was peaceful in the late afternoon light. Selena sat beside Nora's wheelchair, watching as her grandmother's fingers traced the pattern on her new quilt, a gift from Pedro that had arrived that morning, its deep purples and blues matching Nora's favorite colors perfectly. "That young man," Nora said, her voice stronger than it had been days ago, "he sees you." Selena adjusted her glasses, buying time before responding. The past week had been a whirlwind of hospital discharge papers, rehabilitation arrangements, and late-night conversations with Pedro about everything and nothing. He'd handled the financial arrangements for Nora's care with quiet efficiency, never making Selina feel indebted or less than. "I see him too," she finally replied, thinking of how naturally Pedro had fit himself into their lives, bringing coffee during morning visits and architectural magazines for Nora to browse during her therapy sessions. "Then stop looking for reasons it won't work," Nora said firmly, her stroke-weakened hand finding Selina's. "Sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in our deepest fears." Before Selina could respond, a familiar figure appeared at the garden entrance. Pedro walked toward them, his sleeves rolled up as always, carrying what looked like building plans. "Ladies," he greeted them, bending to kiss Nora's cheek before squeezing Selina's shoulder gently. "How's therapy going today?" "This old body's got some fight left," Nora declared proudly. "The therapist says I might be ready for stairs next week." "Perfect timing," Pedro said, spreading the plans on the small garden table, "because I have something to show you both." Selina leaned forward, her breath catching as she recognized the design. It was his community center project, but evolved, more detailed. The rooftop garden had expanded, and there was now a dedicated senior activities wing. "The Newman Foundation Board called," Pedro continued, his eyes on Selina. "They want to fund more than just your scholarship. They're interested in backing the entire community center project." Selina's heart stopped. "What? Your interview last week, when you talked about intergenerational community support, about creating spaces where seniors could mentor at-risk youth," he smiled. "They want to make it real, all of it. But how?" "Apparently, one of the board members has a mother in this rehabilitation center. She overheard Nora talking about your dreams during physical therapy, made the connection to your application." Pedro's eyes were bright with excitement. "They're offering full funding for both your education and the center's construction." Tears blurred Selina's vision as she stared at the plans. There was her dream, rendered in precise architectural lines: spaces for counseling, areas for youth programs, community gathering rooms, and even a memorial garden she knew would be perfect for Nora's beloved flowers. "There's more," Pedro said softly. "They want me to be the lead architect, if that's okay with you." Selina looked up at him, seeing the man who'd gone from paid dinner companion to the architect of her dreams, both professionally and personally. "It's more than okay." Nora clapped her hands delightedly. "Well, isn't this perfect? Now you two can stop dancing around each other and—" "Grandma," Selina protested. But she was laughing, real joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Pedro knelt beside her chair, his expression serious despite his smile. "Selina, I know you've spent your life being strong, handling everything alone, but building dreams is better with a partner." He took her hand. "Let me be that partner, in all ways." The garden seemed to hold its breath. Even Nora was quiet, watching them with wise eyes. "I'm still learning how to let people in," Selina admitted softly. "I know." Pedro's thumb traced circles on her palm. "And I'm still learning how to be worthy of that trust. We can learn together." A memory flashed. That first dinner, when she'd been so careful to maintain professional distance. Now here they were, planning to build not just a community center, but a future neither had dared imagine months ago. "Partners," she agreed, squeezing his hand. Nora made a satisfied sound. "About time. Now, Pedro dear, tell me more about that senior wing. I have some suggestions." As Pedro reviewed the plans with Nora, pointing out features and noting her ideas, Selina watched them with a heart so full it felt like it might overflow. Her grandmother's strength returning day by day, her educational dreams secured, her vision for helping others taking tangible form, and through it all this man who had transformed from a business arrangement into the foundation of her future. Later that evening, walking through the rehabilitation center's corridors toward the parking lot, Pedro took Selina's hand. "Move in with me," he said quietly. She stopped walking. "What?" "Your lease is up next month. The apartment's too small for all your plants anyway." His eyes held both humor and hope. "I have a spare room that would make a perfect study space for your final semester." And he rubbed the back of his neck, that endearing, nervous gesture she'd grown to love. "I sleep better when you're near." Selina thought about her tiny apartment, about how many nights lately had ended with them falling asleep on Pedro's couch while discussing project plans, about how natural it felt to make coffee in his kitchen, to leave her psychology books scattered across his dining table. "The spare room stays a study," she said finally. "I'm not sleeping alone just to maintain some illusion of propriety." Pedro's smile could have lit up the darkening evening. "Deal." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though I should warn you, I'm designing us a house. Nothing fancy, just A place that's ours, with plenty of windows for your plants and a garden for Nora when she's stronger. Selina looked up at him, this man who kept finding new ways to share her dreams while adding touches of his own. I love you, she said simply, not because you make things easier, but because you make the hard things worth facing. That's good, he replied, his voice rough with emotion, because I plan to face everything with you, the hard things, the beautiful things, all of it. As they drove home, and when had she started thinking of his place as home, Selina thought about the various prices of time, how she'd once sold an evening of her time to a lonely man, never imagining she was actually buying a future, how the cost of dreams sometimes came in unexpected currency, trust given, walls lowered, love risked. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of promise as they drove toward a future neither had planned, but both had somehow built, one genuine moment at a time. 1 year later, Selina stood in the newly completed community center's rooftop garden, watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in shades of gold. Her graduation robes rustled in the evening breeze, the master's degree in psychology still feeling surreal in her hands. Below, she could hear the sounds of celebration drifting up from the opening gala, laughter, music, and the buzz of dreams taking flight. I thought I'd find you here, Pedro's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him approaching, his suit jacket slung casually over one shoulder, his blue-gray eyes warm with understanding. Needed a moment? Just taking it all in, she replied, gesturing to the garden around them. Every plant had been chosen with purpose, hardy herbs for the youth cooking program, calming lavender for the meditation area, and in the center, a flourishing rose bush from Nora's garden, transplanted here as a symbol of growth and resilience. Pedro stepped closer, sliding an arm around her waist. Having any regrets about combining your graduation celebration with the center's opening? None. Selina leaned into him, thinking about how far they'd come from that first arranged dinner. It feels right. This place, and it's part of my journey, too. Speaking of journeys, Pedro said, reaching into his pocket, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Selina's heart skipped as he withdrew a small velvet box, but instead of dropping to one knee as she'd half expected, he simply held it out to her. Open it, he encouraged softly. Inside wasn't a ring, but a key, old-fashioned and ornate, clearly not meant for any modern lock. I don't understand, she said, though something in her heart fluttered with anticipation. Come with me. He led her to the far corner of the garden, where a small treehouse perched among the carefully planned landscaping. Selina gasped softly. It was an exact replica of one of the designs she'd seen in his sketchbook months ago, the one he'd called his escape route for the soul. Try the key, he suggested, his hand warm on the small of her back. The key fit perfectly into the treehouse's whimsical lock. Inside, Selina found a cozy space lined with cushions and twinkling lights. On a small table sat a familiar coffee cup, the same type from their first meeting at the coffee shop. Look inside, Pedro whispered. Her hands trembling slightly, Selina picked up the cup. There, nestled in red velvet, was a ring, elegant and understated, with tiny leaves etched into the band. A year ago, Pedro said softly, I tried to buy time with you because I was afraid of being alone. Instead, I found something priceless, real love, genuine connection, a partner in building dreams. He took the cup gently, removing the ring. Now I'm asking for all your time, not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because I never want to be without you. Tears blurred Selina's vision as he knelt before her in the tiny treehouse. You rebuilt my faith in love, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. You showed me that real connection isn't about perfect facades or social expectations. It's about being genuine, being real, being us. Through the treehouse window, Selina could see the community center below, its windows glowing warmly in the dusk. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from paid dinner to partnership, from arrangement to love, from separate dreams to shared visions. The thing about architects, Pedro said, holding up the ring, is that we're trained to build on solid foundations. You, Selina Marie Brooks, are the strongest foundation I've ever known. Will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had always been meant to be there. As Pedro pulled her into his arms, a familiar voice called from below. Did she say yes? Nora's voice rang out. These old legs can't climb up there to check. They looked down to see Nora standing proudly without her cane, surrounded by gala guests who had spilled into the garden. Among them were faces that told their story. Mitch from the coffee shop, Mrs. Martinez, who had called Pedro during Nora's stroke, even Mrs. Reynolds from the university financial office. "She said yes," Pedro announced, his voice carrying traces of the boy who still believed in tree houses and dreams. Cheers erupted from below, and someone started playing music, their song from that first arranged dinner, now transformed into a celebration of chosen love. As they climbed down to join the celebration, Selena paused on the last rung. "You know what this means, right?" Pedro raised an eyebrow questioningly. "You finally have to let me pay you back for that first dinner," she teased. "With interest." He laughed, pulling her close. "I accept payment in forever," he murmured against her hair. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Nora had been escorted home by Mrs. Martinez, Selena and Pedro stood in their favorite spot, the coffee shop where it all began. Mitch had left them a key, along with 2 fresh cups of their usual order. "You planned all this," Selena said, noticing how the shop's lights created the same patterns they had that first morning. "I had help," Pedro smiled. "Turns out your grandmother is quite the co-conspirator." Selena touched the ring on her finger, watching how it caught the light. "That first night when you offered to pay for my company, did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" "No," he admitted, "but I hoped for something real. You gave me so much more than that." As they sat in their usual corner, Selena looked around at the life they'd built, the community center that would help countless youth, the home they shared filled with her plants and his designs, the love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning. "You know what I think?" she said softly. "What's that?" "Some things can't be bought." "Not really. But sometimes—" She smiled, remembering her grandmother's words. "Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as transactions, just waiting for us to discover their true value." Pedro pulled her close, and in the quiet of the coffee shop where their story began, they shared a kiss that tasted of endings and beginnings, of dreams fulfilled and promises of more to come. Because in the end, love isn't about the price of time or the cost of dreams. It's about finding someone who sees your true value, who helps you build foundations strong enough to support not just your own dreams, but the dreams you never knew you could share. And that, they both knew, was worth more than all the arranged dinners in the world. 5 years later, the laughter of children drifted up from the community center's main hall to the rooftop garden, where Selena Monroe stood watering the thriving rose bush that had once belonged to her grandmother. The November air was crisp, but the greenhouse Pedro had designed kept the garden flourishing year-round. "Dr. Monroe?" a teenage voice called from the doorway. "The group therapy session is about to start." "Coming, Amara," Selena replied, smiling at the 16-year-old who had been one of the center's first success stories. Now Amara helped with the younger kids, her own journey inspiring others to believe in second chances. As she headed downstairs, Selena passed the wall of photographs chronicling the center's history. There was the opening day picture, herself in graduation robes, Pedro's arms around her, Nora beaming proudly. Next to it hung a photo from their wedding in this very garden, where Nora had danced without her cane, and Pedro had surprised everyone by singing their first dance song. The newest addition to the wall made her pause, a picture from last month's 5th anniversary celebration. In it, Pedro held their 6-month-old daughter, Nora Grace Monroe, while the original Nora, now 83 and still sharp as ever, told stories to a group of enchanted teenagers. "Admiring our family tree," Pedro's voice came from behind her as his arms slipped around her waist. "Just thinking about time," she replied, leaning back against him. "How it has its own way of knowing what we need, even when we think we're just making arrangements." Pedro chuckled, the sound warm against her hair. "Speaking of arrangements, your grandmother wants us for Sunday dinner. She's teaching Lucy to make her famous apple pie." Lucy, their 3-year-old, had become Nora's devoted baking apprentice, carrying on traditions that would have been lost if life hadn't woven their stories together so unexpectedly. "Remember when I tried to pay you back for that first dinner?" Selena asked, turning in his arms. "As I recall, you still owe me," Pedro teased. "The interest rate was set in moments of forever, and you keep adding to my happiness account." Smooth talker. She reached up to straighten his tie. Some habits never changed. The board meeting went well. They approved the expansion, 3 more centers across Boston by next year. His eyes shone with the same passion she'd first glimpsed when he talked about building spaces that nurture the human spirit. "Your program model is revolutionary, Dr. Monroe. Combining youth counseling with senior mentorship, you're changing lives." "We're changing lives," she corrected. "Together." The sound of small feet pattering down the hall interrupted them. Lucy came running, her dark curls bouncing, Pedro's blue-gray eyes bright with excitement. "Mama, Daddy," baby Nora smiled at me. A real smile, not the gassy kind. Pedro scooped her up, making her giggle. Just like her mama, lighting up rooms since day one. Selena watched her husband and daughter, her heart full. In her office upstairs, she still kept the business card from that first night, tucked into her credentials frame, a reminder that love sometimes arrives in unexpected packages. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows Pedro had specially designed to cast rainbow patterns across the floor. Below, another group of teens was arriving for their session, each carrying stories and dreams that needed space to grow. "Ready for your group?" Pedro asked, setting Lucy down. "Always." Selena kissed them both quickly. "Dinner at home tonight? I'll make that pasta you love. The one from our first home-cooked meal together? Perfect." His eyes softened with memory. "I'll pick up baby Nora from your grandmother's after my last meeting." As Selena watched them go, Lucy chattering about her day, Pedro listening with that same intense focus he'd always given to genuine connection, she thought about the true value of time, how its real worth isn't measured in dollars or arrangements, but in moments strung together like precious beads, first meetings and leap-of-faith dinners, midnight conversations and morning coffees, babies' smiles and grandmother's wisdom. She touched the delicate leaf-etched ring on her finger, then walked toward the room where her next group waited. Because sometimes the greatest gift time gives us isn't the hours we try to buy or sell, but the moments we choose to give freely, building love one genuine connection at a time. That evening, in their home filled with thriving plants and architectural drawings, with the sounds of family dinner and children's laughter, with Nora's stories and Pedro's gentle teasing, Selena knew no arrangement, no transaction could ever equal the priceless gift of choosing love, day after day, moment by moment, forever. The end. Since this is a story about how an unusual arrangement turned into true love, and about how sometimes we need to have the courage to accept help and trust, here's an impactful question. If you had to choose between maintaining your total independence, carrying the weight of all your dreams and difficulties alone, or accepting help from someone who shows they truly care about you, even if it meant making yourself vulnerable, which path would you choose and why? Like Selena, would you have the courage to let down your defenses and give true love a chance? Your participation in the channel is very important. The golden highlights in her elegant braids caught the fluorescent light of the Brewhaven coffee shop as she wiped down the same counter for the third time that morning. Her dark brown eyes, usually bright with sarcasm, looked tired today. "Another double shot Americano," she called out, forcing energy into her voice that she didn't feel. The customer, a woman in yoga pants scrolling through Instagram, barely looked up as she grabbed her drink. Melissa watched her walk away, probably heading to some perfect suburban life that existed only in social media posts. The bell above the door chimed, and Melissa's shoulders automatically straightened. Keep smiling, keep working, keep surviving. That's what Dr. Martinez had told her during their last session. The sertralina from Walgreens was supposed to help with the fog in her head, but some mornings still felt like swimming through concrete. She opened her Dailyo app quickly, tapping the OK mood emoji. Not great, not terrible, just okay. That seemed to be her default setting these days. The morning rush had been brutal. Her manager, Derek, kept shooting her looks every time she moved a little slower than usual. Her Converse sneakers were already killing her feet, and it wasn't even noon. The medical bills sitting in her small Wicker Park apartment felt like they were calling her name, each one a reminder of everything she'd lost. Stop thinking about it, she told herself, the same mantra she'd been using for months. A text from her friend Janae popped up. "Girl, saw your ex at Whole Foods with some new chick. You dodging my calls again?" Melissa swiped the message away without responding. She wasn't ready for Janae's well-meaning pep talks about getting back out there, and healing takes time. Some wounds were too fresh for motivational quotes. The steam wand hissed as she prepared another latte, her silver bracelet, the one her mother had given her before she passed, catching on her uniform sleeve. She adjusted it carefully. It was one of the few beautiful things she had left. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deeper than the usual customer chatter, with an edge of desperation that made Melissa look up. A tall man stood at the counter, and what struck her first wasn't his perfectly styled brown hair or his expensive Banana Republic shirt. It was the way he held the baby. The infant was crying. Not the gentle fussing she'd heard from other customers, children, but the kind of desperate wailing that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. The man's blue-gray eyes looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I'm sorry," he said, shifting the baby awkwardly. "I know this is unusual, but I really need help. His name is Anthony Gabriel, and this is my son, Brian." His voice cracked slightly on the word son. "I've tried everything. Formula. Different bottles. The expensive Dr. Brown's ones everyone recommends. Nothing works." Melissa found herself walking around the counter before she realized what she was doing. The baby's cries seemed to echo in her chest, awakening something she'd been trying to bury for months. "How old is he?" she asked softly, her hands instinctively reaching toward the child. 6 months, Anthony replied, his relief visible as she gently took Brian. "His mother, she died during childbirth. I've been raising him alone, and I'm failing." The moment Brian settled against Melissa's chest, something shifted. His cries softened to whimpers, then to silence. Her body remembered what her mind was trying to forget. The weight of a baby, the trust, the need. Anthony stared at her with wonder. "How did you—" Melissa felt tears threatening to fall as she looked down at Brian's blue-gray eyes, so much like his father's. She knew she should hand him back, should return to her coffee counter and her safe, numb routine. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "I think I can help you." But what she didn't tell him was that helping him might destroy the careful walls she'd built around her broken heart. 3 days later, Melissa stood outside a glass tower in downtown Chicago, questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. The address Anthony had texted her on WhatsApp seemed impossible, the kind of building where people in $1,000 suits disappeared into elevators that probably cost more than her annual salary. She adjusted her gold hoop earrings nervously, smoothing down her best H&M blouse. Her reflection in the building's windows showed a woman trying too hard to look like she belonged. "Apartment 4207. Just tell security you're here for Brian Gabriel," his message had read, followed by a simple, "Thank you." Those 2 words had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. The security guard, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, smiled when she mentioned Brian's name. "Oh, you must be the lady Mr. Gabriel's been waiting for. That baby's been keeping the whole floor up," he chuckled, handing her a visitor's badge. "Elevator bank C, all the way up." As the elevator climbed, Melissa's phone buzzed with notifications she'd been ignoring. Janae had sent 17 messages since yesterday, ranging from concerned to annoyed. Her boss Derek had called twice about shift coverage. 3 different collection agencies had left voicemails that she'd deleted without listening to. But Brian's face kept floating in her mind, those blue-gray eyes that had looked at her with complete trust, the way his tiny fingers had wrapped around hers. Her body had responded to his need in a way that terrified and comforted her simultaneously. The elevator opened to a hallway that smelled like expensive candles and success. Apartment 4207 had double doors, actual double doors, like in the movies. Before she could knock, 1 door swung open. Anthony stood there in a wrinkled Patagonia sweatshirt, his usually perfect hair sticking up at odd angles. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older than his 34 years. "Melissa," he breathed, relief flooding his voice. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." Behind him, she could hear Brian crying, that same desperate wail from the coffee shop. The sound went straight through her like electricity. "Sois, I almost did," she admitted, stepping inside. The apartment was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her car, but it felt cold, unlived in, like a magazine spread rather than a home. Anthony ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time since you left the shop. I've tried everything, different formulas, those expensive organic ones from Whole Foods, even called 3 different pediatricians. Nothing works." Brian's cries grew louder from what she assumed was the nursery. Without thinking, Melissa walked toward the sound, her practical nature taking over. "Show me his routine," she said. The nursery was perfect, like everything else in Anthony's world appeared to be. Soft grays and whites, a crib that probably cost more than most people's rent, shelves lined with organic everything. But Brian lay in his Carter's onesie, red-faced and inconsolable, his tiny fists waving in frustration. Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar recognition. "When did he last eat?" "An hour ago, maybe 2. Anthony's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Time kind of blurs together when you're not sleeping." She picked up Brian gently, feeling that same immediate settling she'd experienced at the coffee shop. His cries softened to whimpers as she held him against her chest, swaying slightly. "He's not hungry," she said softly. "He's scared." Anthony stared at her. Scared. Babies can sense when the people caring for them are stressed, Melissa explained, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're running on empty. He can feel that energy. It's making him anxious." The room fell quiet except for Brian's gradually calming breaths. Anthony sank into the expensive nursing chair, covering his face with his hands. "I'm failing him," he whispered. "Elena would have known what to do. She had all these books, took every class. I was supposed to be the provider. She was supposed to be—" His voice broke. Melissa felt something crack open in her chest, not the careful numbness she'd cultivated, but something warmer and more dangerous. "You're not failing him," she said quietly. "You're just learning." Anthony looked up at her, his blue-gray eyes so similar to his son's. "Will you help us? I know it's unusual, and I can pay whatever you need. My company just secured another round of funding, and How much?" The practical question slipped out before she could stop it. "Whatever you're making at the coffee shop, I'll triple it." Melissa's mind raced. Triple her salary would cover her medical bills, her rent, maybe even let her breathe for the first time in months. But holding Brian felt like walking through a minefield of memories she wasn't ready to face. Her phone buzzed with another notification, probably another overdue bill. She looked down at Brian, now peaceful in her arms, his tiny hand gripping her finger with surprising strength. "I need to know something first," she said, meeting Anthony's desperate gaze. What happened to his mother really happened. The silence that followed told her she wasn't prepared for the truth she was about to hear. Anthony's hands trembled as he reached for the framed photo on Brian's dresser, and Melissa realized she wasn't ready for what he was about to reveal. "Elena was perfect," Anthony began, his voice barely above a whisper. The photo showed a beautiful Latina woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "We met at Northwestern. She was finishing her master's in education. I was drowning in my startup. She used to joke that I lived on energy drinks and impossible dreams." Melissa shifted Brian gently in her arms, feeling the weight of the story she was about to hear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched endlessly, but the apartment felt smaller somehow, filled with grief that hadn't been spoken aloud. "The pregnancy was perfect, too," Anthony continued, setting the photo down with careful precision. "Every appointment, every ultrasound. She did yoga, ate organic everything from that expensive place on North Avenue, read to him every night." His Apple Watch buzzed with a Slack notification, but he ignored it completely. She had this playlist on Spotify, classical music mixed with Spanish lullabies her grandmother used to sing. Brian made a soft sound against Melissa's chest, and she found herself swaying automatically, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Oh, what happened?" she asked gently, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Anthony walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. "Labor started normally. We went to Northwestern Memorial, the best hospital in the city." She was excited, texting her sister updates, posting on Instagram about finally meeting our little miracle. His voice cracked on the last words. Melissa felt her own chest tighten, memories threatening to surface that she'd worked so hard to bury. She focused on Brian's breathing, steady and trusting against her. 22 hours of labor, Anthony continued. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. Placental abruption. The doctors moved so fast, I barely understood what was happening. 1 minute Elena was squeezing my hand, laughing about how Brian was taking his time like his father. The next minute, alarms were going off and they were rushing her to surgery. The apartment felt heavy with silence, except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic below. "They saved Brian," Anthony said, turning from the window. His blue-gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But Elena, she hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop the bleeding. I held her hand as she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Melissa closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. She knew that kind of loss. Different circumstances, but the same hollow ache that followed you everywhere. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The worst part was coming home," Anthony continued, his voice stronger now, like he needed to get it all out. "The nursery was ready. The fridge was full of casseroles from Elena's friends, and I had this perfect baby who needed me to be perfect too. But I couldn't even figure out how to work the bottle warmer she'd registered for at Target." Brian stirred in Melissa's arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed to fill the space between their pain. She looked down at his peaceful face. Elena's son, Anthony's miracle, a child born from love and loss in equal measure. "Elena's family blames me," Anthony said quietly. Her mother won't return my calls. Her sister blocked me on Instagram after I posted a photo of Brian on his 3-month birthday. They think I should have done more, should have insisted on a C-section earlier, should have been a better advocate. And you blame yourself too, Melissa said. It wasn't a question. Anthony nodded, sinking into the expensive nursing chair that probably Eleanor had picked out, dreaming of rocking her son to sleep. Every day, I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently. Maybe if I hadn't been checking my phone during contractions, maybe if I'd pushed the doctors harder when she said something felt wrong. Melissa understood that kind of guilt, the endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys that could consume you if you let them. Her own loss had come with its own catalogue of self-blame. Is that why you avoid social media? She asked. Just can't handle seeing other people's perfect families, Anthony admitted. Elena used to love Instagram. She had this account where she posted about teaching and pregnancy. Her last post was a picture of the hospital bag, captioned, "Ready to meet our little man." It got 300 likes and dozens of comments about how excited everyone was. Brian chose that moment to open his eyes, looking up at Melissa with that serious expression babies get when they're taking in the world. She felt something shift inside her chest, not the careful numbness she'd maintained, but something warmer and more frightening. "He has her eyes," she said softly. "So everyone says that," Anthony replied. "But sometimes I look at him and I see her smile, or the way she used to scrunch her nose when she was thinking." Melissa's phone buzzed with another text from Janae. "Girl, where are you? Derek's been calling about your shifts." Reality crashed back in. Her life outside these expensive walls, the bills waiting in her apartment, the job she couldn't afford to lose. "Anthony," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "if I do this, if I help you with Brian, I need you to understand something about me, too." Melissa's words hung in the air like a confession she'd never planned to make, and Anthony could see the pain she'd been hiding behind her sarcastic smile. Brian had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with perfect trust. Melissa looked down at him, her dark brown eyes reflecting something Anthony hadn't seen before. Not just compassion, but recognition, the kind that comes from walking through your own version of hell. "I lost a baby too," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city below. 7 months ago. Anthony felt his breath catch. The way she'd held Brian so naturally, the immediate calm that seemed to radiate from her when she touched him, it all made terrible, beautiful sense now. "His name was Marcus," Melissa continued, her gold hoop earrings catching the light as she shook her head slightly. "He was born at 28 weeks, premature rupture of membranes, they called it. Medical terminology for your body failed when it mattered most." She shifted Brian gently, and Anthony noticed how her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet she'd mentioned, seemed to give her strength as she touched it. "He lived for 6 days, she whispered. 6 days in the NICU at University of Chicago Medical Center. Tubes and wires everywhere, machines beeping constantly. I couldn't hold him properly because of all the equipment, but I could touch his tiny hand through the incubator." Anthony sank deeper into the nursing chair, Elena's chair, feeling the weight of shared grief settling between them. He understood now why Melissa had seemed to recognize something in Brian's cries, in his need. "My husband couldn't handle it," Melissa continued, her voice growing stronger, like telling the story was pulling something out of her that needed to be released. "Marcus dying, the medical bills, me falling apart. He filed for divorce while I was still getting bills from the funeral home. Said he needed space to process and couldn't handle my depression." "Jesus," Anthony breathed. "The medical bills destroyed my credit," she said, a bitter laugh escaping. "So even with insurance, the NICU stay cost more than most people make in 2 years. That's why I'm working at the coffee shop, why I take extra shifts, why my phone is constantly buzzing with collection calls I can't answer." Brian stirred slightly in her arms, and she automatically began that gentle swaying motion that seemed to come from muscle memory. "After Marcus died, my body," she paused, searching for the right words. "It didn't understand that he was gone. I was still producing milk for a baby who would never need it. The doctors gave me medication to stop it, but sometimes when I hold Brian, it's like my body remembers what it was made to do." Anthony felt tears threatening. "Melissa, I had no idea. When I asked you to help, I didn't know." "That's why I can help him," she interrupted gently. "Brian needs what my body is still trying to give. And maybe," she looked down at the sleeping baby, "maybe I need him too." The apartment felt different now, less like a showcase and more like a sanctuary where two broken people had found each other through an impossible circumstance. "Is that why you stopped going to church?" Anthony asked, remembering how she'd mentioned her faith at the coffee shop. Melissa nodded. "Pastor Williams kept talking about God's plan, about how everything happens for a reason. I wanted to scream at him that there was no good reason for Marcus to die, no lesson worth learning from watching your child suffer." She paused. "But sometimes, when I hold Brian, I hear the hymns in my head. Amazing grace, how great thou art. The songs my grandmother used to sing when I was scared." Anthony's phone buzzed with notifications he continued to ignore. His team at the startup probably wondering why he'd missed 3 meetings today. But sitting here, watching Melissa hold his son with such tender understanding, he realized he'd been approaching everything wrong. "I've been trying to be perfect," he said quietly, "for Brian, for Elena's memory. I thought if I could just figure out the right formula, the right schedule, the right everything, I could somehow make up for the fact that he doesn't have his mother." "Babies don't need perfect," Melissa said, adjusting Brian's position with practiced ease. "They need present. They need someone who shows up even when it's hard, even when you're scared you're doing it wrong." Her phone buzzed again. Derek from the coffee shop, probably wondering where she was. The real world existed outside Anthony's expensive windows, with its bills and obligations and people who didn't understand that sometimes healing requires taking risks that look insane from the outside. "If I do this," Melissa said, meeting Anthony's eyes, "I need some rules. I keep my apartment, my independence. This is about helping Brian, not about me becoming some live-in nanny from a romance novel." Anthony nodded quickly. "Of course. Whatever you need. And I need you to understand that some days will be harder than others. Grief isn't linear, and neither is healing." "I understand," he said, though he wasn't sure he completely did. Brian chose that moment to wake up, his blue-gray eyes opening slowly, focusing on Melissa's face with that serious baby expression. He made a soft sound, not crying, just acknowledging her presence. "Hey there, little man," she whispered, and Anthony watched his son's face transform into something that might have been a smile. "I think," Melissa said softly, "we're all going to learn something from each other." But what none of them knew was that learning to trust again would test them in ways they never imagined. 2 weeks later, Melissa discovered that some routines save you, and others slowly break down the walls you've built around your heart. The alarm on her cracked iPhone 8 buzzed at 6:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her small Wicker Park apartment. Her Google Calendar showed today's schedule: Brian 8 a.m., 12 p.m., Brewhaven 2 p.m., 8 p.m. The new routine was exhausting, but for the first time in months, her Dialio app showed more green, good days than grey okay ones. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through the WhatsApp messages from Anthony that had come in during the night. A photo of Brian at 3 a.m. with the caption, "Couldn't sleep, but look at this face." Another at 5:15 a.m. "He's asking for you, I think." And finally, "Thank you for yesterday, see you at 8. Those messages had become her favorite part of waking up, though she'd never admit it. Melissa pulled on her favorite jeans and a soft sweater from Target, checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her braids looked good. She'd gotten them redone at Janet's cousin's salon in Bronzeville last weekend, the blonde tips freshly touched up. Her gold hoops caught the morning light filtering through her small window. The 20-minute bus ride to Anthony's building had become a meditation of sorts. She'd put in her earbuds and listened to gospel music, Tasha Cobbs, Kirk Franklin, sometimes her grandmother's old Mahalia Jackson recordings. The music filled the spaces in her chest that had been empty for so long. "Morning, Miss Clark," the security guard, Robert, called out as she entered the lobby. "How's our little man doing?" "Growing like a weed," she replied, genuinely smiling. It still surprised her how easily the smiles came now. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor used to make her nervous. Now it felt like coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. Anthony opened the door before she could knock, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing a Northwestern University t-shirt and pajama pants. The casual version of him had become her favorite, less polished, more real. "He's been fussy since 5 a.m., Anthony said, stepping aside to let her in. "I tried everything, the swing, the white noise machine, even that playlist Elena made. Nothing worked." Melissa could hear Brian's cries from the nursery, but they didn't sound distressed anymore. They sounded like calls for her specifically. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, that familiar tightening in her chest that meant her milk was ready. "Good morning, sweet boy," she murmured. lifting Brian from his crib. He was wearing a Carter's onesie with little dinosaurs. Anthony's choice, she could tell. Elena probably would have picked something more sophisticated. The moment Brian felt her arms around him, his cries softened to whimpers, then to the contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Melissa settled into the nursing chair, the expensive one that had become hers by default, and began to feed him. Anthony lingered in the doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He loves you," he said quietly. "I love him too," she replied, surprised by how easily the words came. 3 months ago, she couldn't imagine loving anything again. Now this little boy had somehow crept past all her defenses. "Coffee?" Anthony asked, the question that had become their morning ritual. "Please." 2 sugars. Splash of oat milk. She heard him moving around the kitchen, the sound of the expensive espresso machine he'd bought but never learned to use properly. These small domestic moments had become precious to her. Proof that she could still be part of something, still be needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Girl, you've been glowing lately. What's his name?" Melissa smiled, typing back, "His name is Brian. He's 6 months old and he's teaching me how to be happy again." Janae's response was immediate. "Boy, you know what I mean, but I'm glad you're smiling. Bring him by the shop sometime." Anthony returned with 2 mugs, hers in a ceramic cup from some tech conference, his in a Northwestern mug that had seen better days. He'd learned to make her coffee exactly how she liked it, which felt more intimate than it should have. "I have to ask you something," he said, settling into the other chair in the nursery. "My company is hosting a small gathering next Friday. Nothing fancy, just dinner with some investors. But I was wondering if you and Brian might come with me." Melissa looked up from Brian, surprised, like a date. "Like—" Anthony ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as nervous energy. "Like I don't want to spend another evening making small talk about market projections when I could be home with the 2 people who matter most to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the morning light streaming through the nursery windows. Melissa felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with Brian's feeding schedule. "Anthony," she said carefully, "we agreed this was about helping Brian. I'm not looking for anything complicated." "I know," he said quickly. "I know we did, but Melissa, these past 2 weeks, I haven't felt this alive since before Elena died. And I hope, that maybe you feel something too." Brian had finished eating and was now looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the weight of the conversation happening above his head. Melissa shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently while she gathered her thoughts. "I feel something," she admitted quietly, "but I'm scared. My last relationship ended with divorce papers and a broken heart. I don't know if I'm ready to risk that again." Anthony leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes earnest. "I'm not asking you to risk anything. I'm asking you to consider that maybe we're both healing, and maybe we're healing together for a reason." Before Melissa could answer, Brian made a sound that seemed to say everything she couldn't find words for, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in something beautiful again. Friday night arrived faster than Melissa's courage could catch up, and she found herself standing in front of her closet mirror, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. The black dress from H&M hung perfectly on her curves, the one she'd bought 2 years ago for a work Christmas party she'd ended up skipping. Her braids were pulled back into an elegant low bun, the blonde tips creating a subtle halo effect. She'd borrowed Janae's good jewelry, delicate gold earrings and a matching necklace that made her feel like someone who belonged in Anthony's world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. "Car's downstairs whenever you're ready." Brian's being an angel in his tiny suit. She smiled despite her nerves. Anthony had insisted on getting Brian a miniature navy blazer from Baby Gap, claiming his son needed to look investor-ready. The image of 6-month-old Brian in formal wear had been melting her heart all week. Another message popped up, this one from Janae. "Girl, send pics. And remember, you deserve good things." Melissa stared at her reflection one more time. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the one who'd been surviving on sarcasm and sertralina just a month ago. This woman looked hopeful. It was terrifying. The ride to the restaurant in Anthony's Tesla Model Y felt like floating. Brian sat in his car seat between them, babbling happily and grabbing at everything within reach. He'd grown so much in their weeks together, more alert, more responsive, more trusting. When he looked at her now, his blue-gray eyes lit up with recognition that made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to belonging. "Nervous?" Anthony asked, his hand briefly touching hers as he adjusted the car's climate control. Terrified, she admitted. I've never been to a business dinner. What if I say something wrong? What if they ask about my job at the coffee shop and realize I don't belong here? Anthony pulled into the valet area of Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. The building looked like something from a magazine, all glass and steel and impossibly elegant people walking through its doors. Melissa, Anthony said, turning to face her fully, you're brilliant. You're raising my son like he's your own, and you make me laugh every single day. If they can't see how incredible you are, that's their problem, not yours. The valet opened her door before she could respond, and suddenly she was stepping onto Michigan Avenue in borrowed jewelry and her best dress, holding a baby who trusted her completely, while the man she was falling for introduced her to his world. The private dining room was intimidating. 12 people in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent, talking about market disruption and sustainable energy solutions. Anthony's hand found the small of her back as he guided her around the room, introducing her simply as Melissa, who's been helping with Brian. She noticed he didn't say babysitter or nanny, just Melissa, like she mattered. Brian was a hit, charming everyone with his serious expressions and occasional baby babble. One of the investors, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, spent 20 minutes talking to Melissa about child development, while Brian sat contentedly in her lap. He's lucky to have you, the woman said. You can tell he feels secure. That doesn't happen by accident. Melissa felt something warm bloom in her chest. For so long, she'd defined herself by her failures. The baby she couldn't save, the marriage she couldn't hold together, the bills she couldn't pay. But here, holding Brian while intelligent people discussed changing the world, she felt capable again. The dinner conversation flowed between renewable energy patents and funding rounds, topics that should have made her feel out of place. Instead, she found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about Anthony's work that she'd never thought to ask before. So your company designs solar panels for urban environments, she asked during dessert. Solar collection systems integrated into building materials, Anthony explained, his eyes lighting up the way they did when he talked about something he loved. The idea is to make every surface energy productive without changing the aesthetic of the building, like the windows could generate power. Exactly, he smiled at her in a way that made her stomach flutter. Eleanor used to say I talked about it too much, but you actually seem interested. The comment slipped out without thought, and Melissa saw Anthony's face change slightly. Not sadness, exactly, but recognition of how different this was from what he'd had before. After dinner, they walked along the lakefront, Brian sleeping peacefully in his stroller. The Chicago skyline glittered across the water, and Melissa felt like she was living someone else's life, the kind of life she'd seen in movies, but never imagined for herself. Thank you, Anthony said as they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. Tonight felt normal, like we were a family going to dinner together. We're not a family, Melissa said automatically, the words sharper than she'd intended. Anthony was quiet for a moment, watching the waves lap against the shore. What are we then? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and fear in equal measure. Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so peacefully in his tiny blazer, his little fist curled around her finger even in sleep. I don't know, she admitted. I know I love him. I know being with both of you makes me feel like myself again, the version of myself I was before everything fell apart. And I know, Anthony said quietly, that when I picture Brian's future, you're in it. When I think about coming home from work, I imagine both of you there. When I think about bedtime stories and first steps and birthday parties, I can't imagine them without you. Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something broken starts to heal. Anthony, I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, he said quickly. I just needed you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real for me. You're not just helping with Brian, you're helping me remember what it feels like to hope for something. Brian stirred in his stroller, making soft baby sounds without waking up. The sound made them both smile, this tiny person who had brought them together in the most unexpected way. I need to tell you something, Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm starting to hope for something too, and that scares me more than anything. But what scared her even more was the realization that she might already be too deep to turn back now. 3 weeks after the dinner, Melissa thought she had everything under control, until one exhausting Tuesday morning, when everything she'd carefully balanced came crashing down. The day started wrong from the moment her alarm failed to go off. Her iPhone 8's battery had died overnight, and she woke up at 7:45 a.m. to Derek from Brewhaven pounding on her apartment door. "Melissa, you were supposed to open this morning." His voice carried through the thin walls of her Wicker Park building. "We've got a line of customers and no one to work the espresso machine." She stumbled to the door in her pajamas, her braids messy from sleep. "Derek, I'm so sorry. My phone died, and I have to be at Anthony's in 15 minutes. Brian has his pediatrician appointment." "I don't care about your babysitting gig," Derek snapped, his face red with frustration. "You work for me, remember? The coffee shop that actually pays your salary." Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar anxiety. She'd been juggling both jobs for weeks, but lately her heart had been more invested in Brian's schedule than her shifts at Brewhaven. The realization hit her like cold water. She was in danger of losing the job that kept her independent. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, already reaching for her clothes. "I'll call Anthony and explain." But when she tried calling Anthony's number, it went straight to voicemail. He was probably already in his morning meeting with potential investors from California, the big presentation he'd been preparing for all week. She fired off a quick WhatsApp message. "Emergency at work. Running 2 hours late. So sorry. Brian's appointment is at 11. Can you handle it?" The response came back immediately. "Mel, I can't. This meeting determines our next funding round. I need you." Her hands shook as she pulled on her Converse and grabbed her keys. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, being caught between two worlds, failing at both. The morning at Brewhaven was brutal. Derek made pointed comments about reliability and commitment, while she worked through the breakfast rush with a fake smile. Her regular customers noticed her distraction, and she spilled a latte on Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for her usual decaf with extra foam. "I'm so sorry," Melissa said, grabbing paper towels while Mrs. Patterson shook coffee off her coat. "Honey, you seem stressed," the older woman said kindly. "Everything all right?" Melissa felt tears threatening. "Just trying to keep all the pieces together." By 10:30 a.m., she was finally free to leave for Anthony's apartment. She caught the first bus to downtown, checking her phone obsessively. 3 missed calls from Anthony, 2 voicemails she didn't have time to listen to, and a series of increasingly frantic WhatsApp messages. "Mel, where are you? Brian's been crying for an hour. I tried the bottle, but he won't take it. The investors moved the meeting to 1 p.m. Please tell me you're close. I don't know what to do. He needs you." The last message made her heart break a little. Anthony, who could negotiate million-dollar deals and revolutionize sustainable energy, was helpless when it came to his own son's basic needs. She arrived at his building at 11:15 a.m., her hair escaping from its ponytail, her Brewhaven uniform stained with coffee and stress sweat. Robert, the security guard, took one look at her and fast-tracked her to the elevator. "Rough morning, Miss Clark?" "You could say that," she replied, trying to catch her breath. She could hear Brian crying before Anthony even opened the door. When he did, she saw a man at the end of his rope, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his blue-gray eyes. "Thank God," he breathed, stepping aside to let her in. I was starting to panic. The pediatrician's office called twice asking if we were still coming. Brian was in his bouncy seat in the living room, his face red from crying, his little fists waving in frustration. The moment he saw Melissa, his cries changed pitch, less distressed, more demanding, like he was scolding her for being late. "I know, baby," she murmured, scooping him up. "Mama's here now." The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Mama, not Melissa's here or I'm here. Mama." Anthony heard it too. She could tell by the way he went very still, watching her settle Brian against her chest. "Oh, Mel," he said quietly. "Did you just—" "I didn't mean to say that," she said quickly, feeling heat creep up her neck. "It just slipped out. I know I'm not his mother." But even as she said it, Brian was already calming in her arms, making those contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Her body responded automatically, that familiar tightening that meant she was ready to feed him, to comfort him, to be everything he needed. "Thought maybe we should cancel the appointment," Anthony said, checking his watch. "Reschedule for when we're both less stressed." "No," Melissa said firmly. "Brian needs his checkup. I can take him." "By yourself?" The question hung in the air between them. Taking Brian to the pediatrician alone felt like crossing a line they hadn't discussed. It felt like being his parent, not just his caregiver. "I've been to every appointment with him for the past month," she pointed out. "I know his feeding schedule, his sleep patterns, when he last had a diaper change. I probably know his routine better than you do right now. Anthony looked like he wanted to argue, but his phone buzzed with another call from his office. The investors just landed at O'Hare, he said, checking the screen. If I don't nail this presentation, go, Melissa said. Brian and I will handle the appointment. I'll text you updates. She could see the internal struggle on Anthony's face, the need to be present for his son versus the pressure to save his company. Finally, he grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the couch. His insurance card is in the diaper bag, he said, moving into business mode. The pediatrician is Dr. Sarah Chen at Northwestern Memorial. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately. Anthony, Melissa said, shifting Brian to one arm so she could touch his shoulder. I've got this. Trust me. He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd become so integral to his life that he couldn't imagine navigating parenthood without her. I do trust you, he said finally, more than anyone. An hour later, sitting in Dr. Chen's office while Brian charmed the nurses with his serious expressions and occasional smiles, Melissa realized something had shifted. When the doctor asked about Brian's home life, she found herself answering naturally. He's sleeping through the night now, eating well, very social. His dad is a wonderful father, very attentive. And you're? Dr. Chen asked, making notes on her tablet. Melissa hesitated for just a moment. I'm his. I help take care of him. But in her heart, she knew she was more than that. She was the person Brian looked for when he woke up. She was the one who knew he preferred to be burped on the left shoulder, that he liked to have his feet tickled during diaper changes, that he calmed down fastest when she hummed old gospel songs. Walking out of the doctor's office with a perfectly healthy Brian in her arms, Melissa realized she had stopped thinking about when this arrangement would end and started thinking about what it would mean if it never did. That evening, Melissa discovered that some conversations change everything, and some truths are too big to take back once they're spoken. She was sitting on the floor of Anthony's living room, Brian propped up against her legs, when Anthony finally came home from his investor meeting. The Chicago skyline twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she'd been humming Amazing Grace, while Brian played with a soft toy from Target. How did it go, she asked, looking up as Anthony loosened his tie. His face was unreadable, but she'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of his moods over the past weeks. We got the funding, he said, but his voice lacked the excitement she'd expected. $2.5 million for the next phase. Anthony, that's incredible. Melissa lifted Brian up, making him giggle. Did you hear that, little man? Your daddy is changing the world. But Anthony wasn't smiling. He sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture she'd come to know so well. How was the appointment? He asked. Perfect. Brian's growing beautifully, hitting all his milestones. Dr. Chen said he's in the 90th percentile for height. She settled Brian in his bouncy seat, where he could see both of them. She also said he's clearly bonded with his primary caregiver. You, Anthony said quietly. Me, Melissa confirmed, feeling heat creep up her neck again. Anthony, about what I said earlier, calling myself his mama, he finished. You called yourself his mama. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. Brian babbled happily, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above his head. I shouldn't have, Melissa said carefully. I know Elena is his mother, even if she's not here. I never want to replace her or... Stop, Anthony said, his voice sharper than she'd heard it before. He stood up, pacing to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. Just stop. Melissa felt her heart sink. She'd overstepped, gotten too comfortable, forgotten her place in this carefully constructed arrangement. I'm sorry, she whispered. Anthony turned around, and she was surprised to see tears in his blue-grey eyes. You're sorry? Mel, do you have any idea what you've given us? What you've given me? She stared at him, confused by the emotion in his voice. I spent 6 months failing at being Brian's father, he continued, his words coming faster now. 6 months of him crying every time I tried to hold him, of feeling like Elena's death was my fault and now I was failing her son too. I was using the Calm app 3 times a day just to function, and I still couldn't sleep because I was terrified something would happen to him on my watch. Brian made a soft sound, and Melissa automatically reached down to adjust his position, the gesture so natural it was unconscious. And then you walked into my life, Anthony said, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. Not just to help with Brian, but to show me what being a parent actually looks like. You don't just feed him and change him and put him to sleep. You know that he likes his left foot tickled more than his right. You know he calms down faster when you hum gospel songs. You know he's getting sleepy when he rubs his ear. Those are just details, Melissa said softly. Those details are love, Anthony replied, and Brian knows it. I've watched him light up when he hears your voice in the hallway. I've seen him reach for you when he's scared or tired or just wants comfort. You are his mama, Mel. Not because Eleanor isn't his mother, but because love doesn't have limits. Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something you've been afraid to hope for suddenly seems possible. But it's more than that, Anthony said, moving closer to where she sat on the floor. For it's watching you become yourself again. You were broken when I met you, and I was broken too. But together, taking care of Brian, we've been healing each other. He knelt down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. The investor meeting went well because I wasn't thinking about Elena for the first time in 8 months, he admitted. I was thinking about you and Brian waiting for me at home. I was thinking about how I couldn't wait to tell you about the funding, to see you smile, to watch Brian try to grab my tie when I pick him up. Anthony, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I love you, he said, the words simple and devastating. I love how you make Brian laugh, how you argue with me about the right way to fold his clothes, how you hum while you're cooking dinner. I love that you're practical and sarcastic and beautiful and strong enough to survive losing everything and still have room in your heart for us. Brian chose that moment to make a demanding sound, reaching his little arms toward them both. Melissa picked him up automatically, and Anthony's hand covered hers where it rested on Brian's back. I love you too, she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. I love you both so much it terrifies me. I never thought I'd be able to feel this way again after Marcus, after my marriage fell apart. But you two, you've made me believe in family again. Anthony's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. So what do we do now? Melissa looked down at Brian, who was looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Now we stop pretending this is temporary, she said. Now we stop being afraid of calling this what it is. And what is it? Anthony asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. It's love, she said simply. Messy and complicated and scary and real. It's a family that doesn't look like what either of us planned, but it's ours. Anthony leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle, while Brian babbled approvingly between them. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. There's something else, Anthony said, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Melissa's breath caught. I know it's crazy, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I know we've only been together for 2 months, but I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning, and I want Brian to call you Mama for real, and I want to build a life with you that's bigger than either of us imagined. But before Melissa could answer, Brian started crying, and this time, it wasn't the kind of crying that stopped when she held him. Brian's cries weren't stopping, and within minutes, Melissa realized this wasn't about hunger or sleepiness, but something that would test everything she and Anthony had just confessed to each other. Something's wrong, Melissa said, her voice cutting through the romantic moment like cold steel. Brian's wails had an edge she'd never heard before, desperate and pained. She pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his small body. Anthony, he's burning up! The velvet ring box fell forgotten to the floor as Anthony jumped to his feet. How high? Melissa was already moving toward the nursery, her practical instincts overriding everything else. Get the thermometer from his diaper bag. Now. The digital thermometer from CVS beeped ominously, 102.8 degrees. Brian's little face was flushed red, and his cries had taken on a quality that made Melissa's chest tight with fear she hadn't felt since Marcus's NICU days. We need to get him to the hospital, she said, already grabbing the diaper bag with one hand while supporting Brian with the other. Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Chen said to bring him straight to the ER if his fever went over 101. Anthony was pulling on his shoes, his face pale. So should we call 911? Faster if we drive, Melissa said, wrapping Brian in a light blanket. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Months of medical appointments with Marcus had taught her to function in crisis mode. Bring your insurance card and his medical records. The ride in Anthony's Tesla felt endless, even though Northwestern Memorial was only 12 minutes away. Melissa sat in the back with Brian, who had stopped crying and was now making weak, whimpering sounds that somehow felt worse than the screaming. "Talk to me, baby," she murmured, stroking his fevered cheek. "Stay with Mama, okay? We're going to make you feel better." Anthony caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Even in crisis, the word Mama felt right, felt true. The emergency department at Northwestern Memorial was controlled chaos. Bright lights, nurses in scrubs moving with practiced efficiency, the smell of antiseptic that brought back too many memories for Melissa. But when she approached the triage desk with Brian, everything happened fast. 6-month-old male, fever 102.8, lethargic, she told the nurse, her voice clinical and clear. No recent illness, up to date on vaccines, breastfed. The nurse took one look at Brian and immediately led them to a pediatric examination room. Within minutes, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the pediatric emergency physician, was examining Brian with gentle but thorough hands. "How long has he had the fever?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, using a specialized thermometer in Brian's ear. "We first noticed it about 30 minutes ago," Melissa replied. 103.2 now. He was fine this afternoon at his regular checkup with Dr. Chen. Anthony stood beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "Is it serious?" "Fevers in babies this young are always concerning," Dr. Rodriguez said honestly. "We need to run some tests to rule out bacterial infection. Blood work, urine sample, possibly a lumbar puncture if his white count is elevated." Melissa felt her knees go weak. Lumbar puncture, spinal tap. The same word she'd heard in Marcus's NICU, words that meant they were looking for meningitis or other serious infections. "Hey," Anthony said quietly, his arm going around her waist. "He's going to be okay. He's strong, and he's got the best advocate in the world taking care of him." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and waiting. Brian screamed during the blood draw, his tiny veins difficult to find. Melissa held him through each test, humming gospel songs under her breath while tears streamed down her face. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she whispered against his sweaty forehead. "That saved a wretch like me." Anthony paced the small room, checking his phone obsessively, calling Dr. Chen's after-hours line twice for reassurance. But every few minutes, he'd come back to where Melissa sat with Brian, his hand touching her shoulder or stroking Brian's hair. "Text from Janny," Melissa said, checking her cracked iPhone screen. "Girl, you missed our Tuesday FaceTime. Everything okay?" She typed back quickly. "Brian's sick, at Northwestern ER. We'll call later." Janny's response was immediate. "OMG, on my way." "You don't have to deal with visitors right now," Anthony said, reading over her shoulder. "She's family," Melissa replied simply. "And Brian needs all the people who love him praying right now." At 11:47 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez returned with Brian's test results. Melissa's hand found Anthony's automatically, both of them bracing for the worst. "Good news," the doctor said, and Melissa felt her entire body sag with relief. "Blood work is normal, urine is clear. This appears to be a viral infection, probably something he picked up from another baby or child. His immune system is doing exactly what it should, so he's going to be okay," Anthony asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He's going to be fine," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "Fever should break in the next day or two. Tylenol for comfort, plenty of fluids, and follow up with Dr. Chen if it gets worse or lasts more than 3 days." Brian had fallen asleep in Melissa's arms during the doctor's explanation, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in hours. His fever had already started to come down, 101.2 on the last check. In the quiet of the hospital room, Anthony sank into the chair beside Melissa's. "I've never been that scared in my life," he admitted. "Not even when Elena was in surgery. This was different. Because he's your son," Melissa said softly. "Because you love him. Because I couldn't imagine losing him," Anthony replied. "And I couldn't imagine going through it without you." Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so trustingly in her arms, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger. "When I was sitting here, holding him through those tests, all I could think was how this is what love looks like. Not the easy moments, not the Instagram-worthy pictures, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Anthony pulled the forgotten ring box from his pocket, setting it gently on the hospital table beside them. "Melissa Renee Clark," he said quietly, "will you marry me? Will you be Brian's mama for real, legally and officially? Will you build a family with us that can handle whatever comes next?" Through her tears, Melissa looked at this man who'd found her in a coffee shop when they were both broken, who'd trusted her with his most precious gift, who'd stood beside her through crisis without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Anthony slipped the simple, elegant ring onto her finger just as Janae burst through the hospital room door, still in her pajamas and looking frantic. "How's my baby?" Janie demanded, then stopped short when she saw the ring. "Oh my God, girl, did you just get engaged in the emergency room?" Melissa laughed through her tears, holding Brian close while Anthony's arm encircled them both. Apparently, this family does everything the hard way. But looking around at the people who'd shown up for her, Anthony, Brian, Janie, even the kind hospital staff, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful families are built from the most unexpected moments. 6 months later, Melissa stood in the bathroom of their new apartment, staring at a pregnancy test that would change everything they thought they knew about their perfect life. The 2 pink lines stared back at her, impossible to deny. Her hands shook as she set the test on the counter beside the engagement ring that still felt new on her finger. Through the bathroom door, she could hear Anthony's voice mixing with Brian's happy babbling as they played in the living room of their Lincoln Park apartment, the place they'd chosen together, big enough for a family but cozy enough to feel like home. This can't be happening, she thought, her mind racing. Not now, when everything was finally falling into place. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of healing and building. She'd quit her job at Brewhaven and started taking online classes in early childhood development, funded by Anthony's insistence that her education was an investment in their family's future. Brian was thriving, walking now, saying mama and dada with equal enthusiasm, charming everyone at Millennium Park during their weekend picnics. Their wedding was planned for next month, a small ceremony at the same church in Bronzeville where Melissa had rediscovered her faith, followed by a reception with close friends and family. Even Eleanor's sister had reached out, wanting to meet the woman who'd brought light back into Brian's and Anthony's lives. But now this, another baby, another chance for everything to go wrong. "Mel?" Anthony's voice carried from the living room. "Brian's asking for you. I think he wants his afternoon snack." She splashed cold water on her face, trying to compose herself. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who'd changed dramatically over the past year, healthier, happier, with a confidence that came from being truly loved. But right now she looked terrified. Walking into the living room, she found Anthony on the floor with Brian, who was now almost a year old and getting into everything. Brian had inherited his father's curious nature and his mother's determination, a combination that kept them constantly entertained and occasionally exhausted. "Mama!" Brian called out, crawling toward her with the speed that still amazed her. She scooped him up automatically, breathing in his familiar baby scent that always calmed her nerves. "How are my boys?" she asked, settling onto the couch with Brian in her lap. "Perfect," Anthony said, joining them. "Brian figured out how to open the cabinet where we keep his toys. Kid's going to be an engineer like his old man." Anthony looked different too, more relaxed, quick to laugh, the permanent worry lines around his eyes replaced by laugh lines. His sustainable energy company had expanded beyond his wildest dreams, but he'd learned to leave work at work, to prioritize dinner time and bedtime stories over late-night emails. "Anthony," Melissa said carefully, "we need to talk about something." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "What's wrong? You look pale." Brian babbled happily, playing with Melissa's braids, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling their living room. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Anthony went very still. "Pregnant. I took 3 tests. They're all positive." Melissa felt tears threatening. "I know we didn't plan this. I know we're still figuring out being married, being Brian's parents. I know it's too soon and too complicated and—" Anthony's hands cupped her face, stopping her panicked words. "Mel, breathe. I'm scared," she whispered. "After what happened with Marcus, after everything we've been through to get here, what if something goes wrong? What if I can't carry this baby to term? What if we're not ready?" Brian, sensing his mama's distress, reached up to pat her cheek with his tiny hand, making soft, comforting sounds. "Look at me," Anthony said gently. "Do you remember what you told me the night Brian got sick? About love not being the easy moments, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Melissa nodded, unable to speak. "I love you," he said simply. "I love Brian, and I'm going to love this baby. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what families do. But what if everything goes perfectly?" Anthony interrupted. What if this baby is healthy and strong and gives Brian a sibling to boss around? What if we're better parents this time because we've already learned how to love a child together? Brian chose that moment to clap his hands, as if applauding his father's speech. The sound made them both laugh, despite the emotional weight of the conversation. Besides, Anthony said, his voice lighter now, we've gotten pretty good at handling the unexpected. Melissa felt something loosen in her chest, not the complete absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Hope, mixed with trust in the man who'd shown her that love could survive anything. "So you're okay with this?" she asked. "I'm terrified," Anthony admitted. "But I'm also excited. Brian's going to be an amazing big brother." As if he understood, Brian looked between his parents and clapped again, making them both smile. 3 weeks later, at their first prenatal appointment with Dr. Sarah Martinez at Northwestern Memorial, they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time, strong and steady, filling the examination room with the promise of new life. "Everything looks perfect, Doctor," Martinez said, pointing to the ultrasound screen. "Due date is March 15th. Would you like pictures?" Anthony squeezed Melissa's hand as they watched their tiny baby on the monitor, no bigger than a grape, but already loved beyond measure. That evening, they sat on their couch with Brian between them, looking at the ultrasound photos. Brian studied the pictures seriously, as if he understood their importance. "What do you think, buddy?" Anthony asked. "Ty ready to be a big brother?" Brian babbled something that sounded remarkably like baby, making them both laugh. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Janai. "Girl, you're glowing in these engagement photos. When are you giving Brian a sibling?" She showed the message to Anthony, who grinned. "Should we tell her?" "Let's wait until after the wedding," Melissa said. "I want one perfect day that's just about us, before we announce we're expanding again." Anthony pulled both of them closer, Brian settling contentedly against his chest, while Melissa curled into his side. Through their living room windows, Chicago sparkled in the distance, the city where they'd found each other, where they'd built a family from broken pieces and impossible circumstances. "I love our life," Melissa said softly. "Even though it's nothing like what either of us planned." "Especially because of that," she replied. "Marcus taught me that love doesn't guarantee a happy ending, but you and Brian taught me that happy endings can come from the most unexpected places." Brian made a sleepy sound, his eyelids getting heavy. Soon he'd be ready for bed, for the nighttime routine they'd perfected over months of practice. Bath time with extra bubbles, stories read in silly voices, lullabies hummed in the dark. "We're going to be okay," Melissa said, not as a question, but as a promise to herself, to Anthony, to their growing family. And for the first time since she'd seen those 2 pink lines, she truly believed it. 3 years later, Melissa Gabriel stood in the kitchen of their Evanston home, watching through the window as Anthony pushed 2-year-old Sophia on the swing set while 4-year-old Brian demonstrated his superhero jumps from the slide. The late afternoon sunlight caught the highlights in her braids, now styled in a sophisticated updo that reflected her new role as Director of Family Services at a non-profit in downtown Chicago. Her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet, still caught the light as she moved, but now it was joined by a simple wedding band and the engagement ring that had survived emergency rooms and midnight feedings and everything life had thrown at their unconventional family. "Mama, watch this!" Brian called out, performing an elaborate somersault that made Sophia clap her hands with delight. His blue-grey eyes, so much like his father's, but with Elena's warmth, sparkled with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted he was loved completely. Sophia, with her mother's dark curls and her father's serious expression, pointed toward the house. "Mama!" she called in her clear toddler voice, the word that still made Melissa's heart skip a beat every time she heard it. The pregnancy with Sophia had been different from her loss with Marcus, filled with cautious joy instead of devastating grief, supported by a partner who held her through every moment of fear. When Sophia was born, healthy and strong at Northwestern Memorial, crying loudly enough to fill the delivery room with life, Melissa had finally understood that some stories get second chances. "Dinner in 10 minutes, she called through the open window, earning a wave from Anthony and excited cheers from the children. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janai. "Still on for Sunday brunch. The kids are excited to see their honorary cousins." Melissa smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it." Sophia's been practicing saying Auntie Janai all week. The kitchen smelled of the pot roast she'd learned to make from a recipe Anthony's mother had shared. Elena's favorite meal, she'd been told. It had taken time, But Elena's family had slowly opened their hearts to Melissa, recognizing that loving Brian didn't mean replacing his birth mother, but honoring her memory by giving him the fullest life possible. A framed photo on the kitchen counter showed Elena holding her pregnant belly, smiling with anticipation she'd never get to fulfill. But next to it sat a recent family photo: Anthony, Melissa, Brian, and Sophia at Millennium Park, all of them laughing at something Brian had said, not a replacement for what was lost, but proof that love could grow in the spaces between grief. The front door opened with the chaos that had become their normal. Brian racing in to wash his hands, Sophia toddling after him with grass stains on her Carter's dress, Anthony following with the inevitable collection of outdoor toys that never seemed to make it back to their proper places. "How was your day?" Anthony asked, kissing her cheek as he passed. His hair was slightly grey at the temples now, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her the way they had that first day in the coffee shop. "Good. The Johnson family finally got approved for adoption. I cried happy tears in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Melissa handed him plates to set on the dining room table. "How was yours?" "The Portland contract came through. We're officially expanding to the West Coast." Anthony grinned. "But more importantly, Brian informed me that he's going to marry his teacher when he grows up." And Sophia learned to say "please" when she wants something. "Peas," Sophia demonstrated from her high chair, clapping her hands. "That's my smart girl," Melissa said, kissing the top of Sophia's curls. As they sat around their dinner table, the one they'd picked out together at IKEA during their first year of marriage, practical but warm, Melissa looked at her family and felt the deep contentment that comes from building something real from broken pieces. Brian was telling an elaborate story about his preschool art project, complete with dramatic gestures that made Sophia giggle. Anthony listened with the patient attention of a father who'd learned to treasure every ordinary moment, and Sophia babbled along, contributing her own commentary in the language only toddlers speak fluently. "What are we grateful for today?" Anthony asked, the dinner tradition they'd started when Brian turned 3. "I'm grateful for my new sneakers with the lights," Brian announced seriously. "And for Mama making the good mac and cheese, not the box kind." "I'm grateful for successful client meetings and for coming home to this chaos," Anthony said, reaching over to squeeze Melissa's hand. "Peas," Sophia contributed, which made everyone laugh. "I'm grateful," Melissa said, looking around the table at faces she couldn't have imagined loving this much just a few years ago, for second chances. For families that don't look like what you planned but feel exactly like home, for little boys who teach you to be brave, and little girls who remind you to find joy in everything. After dinner, after baths and stories, and the elaborate bedtime routine that involved 2 different nightlights, 3 stuffed animals, and Brian reading a picture book to Sophia in his most dramatic voice, Melissa and Anthony finally collapsed on their couch. "Tired?" Anthony asked, pulling her close. "The good kind of tired," she replied, settling against his chest, "the kind that comes from a life well lived." Through their living room windows, Evanston stretched peacefully around them, a suburb they'd chosen for its good schools and tree-lined streets, but mostly for the way it felt like possibility. Not the desperate possibility of people running from something, but the settled possibility of people who'd found where they belonged. Melissa's phone buzzed with a notification from her Dailyo app, a habit she'd kept even after the depression lifted, a way of tracking not just moods but moments of gratitude. Tonight she selected the bright green, radiant emoji and added a note: "Perfect ordinary Tuesday with my extraordinary family." "Remember when you thought this was temporary?" Anthony asked softly, his fingers playing with her braids. "I remember being terrified that loving you both would break me," she admitted. I never imagined it would make me whole instead." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their house settling around them, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft whisper of the baby monitor, the distant sounds of a neighborhood full of families like theirs, all learning to love each other through the beautiful, messy work of being human. Later that night, as Melissa checked on both children before going to bed, she whispered the same prayer she'd said every night since Sophia was born: "Thank you for trusting me with them. Help me be worthy of this love." Standing in the doorway, watching Brian sleep with his arm protectively around his little sister in her toddler bed that he'd insisted be moved into his room, Melissa realized that some families aren't born. They're built one day at a time, one act of love at a time, one choice to stay at a time. And this family, born from loss and watered with hope, had grown into something more beautiful than any of them had dared to dream. What would you have done in Melissa's place? When life breaks your heart completely, do you have the courage to risk loving again? And if you were Anthony, could you have opened your heart to someone new while still honoring the memory of your first love? Love after loss isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about discovering that the heart has infinite capacity to love again, differently, but just as deeply. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.